Tonight, Red Hood, much like all of his fans, doesn't like the fact that he's been made an anti-hero. Batman spends an entire Halloween playing pranks on his villains, and Catwoman spends an entire issue ending up exactly where she began. Thanks for that one. All that and more tonight on the Not So New 52. Hello everyone and welcome to episode 91 of the Not So New 52. I am your host and it's a fifth week. Hooray huzzah! A fifth week means only like 5 comics that I gotta cover. So a super short episode, but I think we all know that that's not the case because me, in my infinite wisdom and constant forethought, I said, hey, on fifth weeks I'm going to cover all the backup stories that have happened since the last fifth week. And what that means is that this fifth week has 5 months worth of backup stories that have been building up because the last fifth week was in December. So it's too much. It is actually too much for me to do, and I had to make some concessions. So we will get to that when we get to the backup portion in the back half of this episode. But regardless, how about I talk about the comics that actually came out this week? Because I think that's probably why you're here more so than the fourth part of Tomahawk. So this week we had 4 annuals in the form of Batman the Dark Knight, Catwoman, Red Hood and the Outlaws, and Earth 2, as well as the 4th issue of Justice League of America because Geoff Johns cannot keep the deadline to save his life. And that is what we will be talking about first and foremost, more or less in that order. So I guess let's start with some Batman the Dark Knight. Batman the Dark Knight Annual Number 1, written by Greg Hurwitz, art by Szymon Kudranski. This is the team behind Penguin, Pain and Prejudice, which I very much surprisingly enjoyed. And they're pretty much just doing the same thing again. So this is pretty standalone. We see Mad Hatter has arrived at the Arkham Detention Facility for Youth, and he got a note from Penguin saying, hey, I've got a business proposition, show up here. And so he arrives and he walks in and he's like, hey, you know, I was put here as a kid, so good job trying to get me off my game and like memories and whatnot, but it ain't gonna work. And as he's walking down the halls, he immediately gets flooded with bad memories of like all the horrible things he went through. And he's like, okay, yeah, well, I'm gonna boil your flesh, Cobblepot. I'm gonna skin you for what you're putting me through. And then Penguin shows up and he's like, really? You're going to get that pissed off at me for being a few minutes late? And we see Penguin walk in with the exact same note that Mad Hatter has saying, I have a business proposition, meet me at this location. And Penguin's like, oh, you should be grateful I even stopped by. You're so far beneath me, like blah, blah, blah. And then Mad Hatter just shows him his own note and he's like, ah, crap, we're being played. What's going on? Who's the one who sent this? And there's a big old flash of lightning, and they make their way downstairs, and it's just like, this is Scarecrow. It's got to be Scarecrow. He's just trying to scare us with fear stuff. So they make their way down, and they see Scarecrow sitting there, and he's just like, hey, what are you guys so scared about? After all, you invited me. And he shows the same exact note, and they all compare, and they're like, okay, if none of us did this, who did? Oh, and by the way, this all takes place on Halloween. Some random Halloween. And another flash of lightning goes off, and they see the silhouette of Batman, and they all start freaking out. And they're like, crap, okay, it's Batman. How do we deal with this? And Penguin like stabs down his umbrella, and he's like, look, he's got us here alone. As long as we stay inside, no one should be able to get us. And we see that the chandelier right above them collapses down because of Penguin like stabbing the ground. And they're like, oh, I bet he set that up. He's trying to kill us. He's finally cracked, man. He's out for us. And Penguin's like, no, that's not the type of guy he is. And they all just kind of start talking about, like, what they dislike about Batman from the same level of, like, oh, You know, as long as there's no stained glass windows, we should be fine. Why does he always insist on bashing through the skylights and the stained glass windows? And they're like, yeah, and he always just like starts throwing punches. No, hey, Penguin, how was your day? He just immediately does that. And they realize, like, yeah, he just does all that stuff to scare us, but like, it works. We are scared. And another lightning goes off, and they see his silhouette again. And he's just like, all right, he's out there waiting. There's 3 of us, though. We could bum rush him. And then they see the shadow against the wall once again. And they all freak out. And it's like, okay, well, maybe we can't take him. What do we got? Do we have any plans? And they think, okay, well, he's outside. So next to the house is a hedge maze. If we make our way out there, we can split up in the hedge maze, and at least 2 of us should be able to get away, and it'll just leave it up to chance. And they're like, all right, fair enough, let's go. And as they're making their way out, someone trips over a little music box carousel thing that plays 3 blind mice. And so the 3 of them go out, and they just start stumbling their way through the hedge maze as 3 blind mice plays. And it's great. It's a great sequence, because they all end up meeting up again just by chance. And they come across basically a scarecrow, but it is looking like Batman because there's some bats actually perching on it. And Penguin turns to Scarecrow and he's like, well, that's ironic. So they all run their way back inside. And they start laying into Scarecrow because he's the one who suggested the hedge maze. And so he starts fighting back against them. They accidentally activate some fear toxin, and then they all just start stumbling around this home, going through their worst fears, and all of them are based off of their childhoods. Obviously, Penguin, they had a whole miniseries about that. They investigate all the Mad Hatter stuff that they've been doing in Batman the Dark Knight, and Scarecrow was also from Dark Knight. So pretty much all these are just from either the series itself or from Simon Kudranski and Greg Hurwitz's earlier work. And it's beautiful little sequences, like Penguin's mom saying, like, oh, I didn't love you, I pitied you, I cared for you because somebody had to. That's the only reason why. And Scarecrow's dad is like, the only reason I'm operating on you is because your mother left me, and I want you to feel alone as I do. And so they all start stumbling down the stairs, falling on top of each other. And eventually, as they are all coming to, the sun starts coming up. And they look outside, it's day, the Batman never showed up, and they all just kind of look at each other and like, all right, well, have a nice day. We will never speak of this again. And they all make their way out. So then cut to Wayne Manor. Turns out Bruce just was waking up from a nice good sleep, and Alfred's like, oh, you didn't have any sort of adventures or anything last night? He's like, nope, decided to take the night off. And he's like, Halloween? You managed to take off Halloween? And he's like, yeah, I was a little bit proactive, and that let me take the night off. And so they walk out of the room, and we see sitting on top of Bruce's computer is the note that he sent to Scarecrow saying, I have a lucrative business venture for you. So Bruce did it. He set it all up. He played them against each other, knowing how much they'd just be terrified of Batman coming after them. I like it. It's an enjoyable little story. The art is fantastic, and it plays perfectly to the mood. Kudranski's just got that creepy factor to him. It's great. As for the writing itself, I think it's all supposed to be like almost a Three Stooges act, in that there's this light little bit of comedy over top of it, but it's still, once we get to the fear toxin section, and even before that, there is just this air of unnervingness because of when is Batman going to come in and just punch them out. It does a good job of really building up of, you expect it to happen at any minute. So overall, I gotta give this one like, I gotta give it like an 8.5. Yeah, 8.5. It really is a great issue. It's a nice little standalone thing. You barely need to know anything going into it. And it's just a solid little story of what does Batman do when he just doesn't want to go out? And the answer is he still takes care of the trash. So 8.5. Catwoman Annual Number 1, written by Ann Nocenti, art by Christian Duce, with Aaron Lopresti and John Livesay on art. So last issue was issue 20, and Catwoman pissed off Penguin by stealing from him. And so Penguin said, build me a rocket that will be able to detect Catwoman's shadow and let it rain bombs down on the Badlands. So we open in the Badlands where these heat-seeking missile things are coming after this kid who's part of the Rat Tail gang. And there are a couple of the Penguin's goons, the ones in suits, are like trying to capture him while these rockets are coming after them. He straight up gets caught in an explosion that hits him into power lines, and his shoes pop off because of it. And Catwoman sees the whole thing happen. She tries to save him, and it's no good. And then we see the leader of the Rat Tail gang, who I think is just named Rat Tail. He comes up and he's like, yeah, man, that kid, he was going off the rails. Like, I don't care that he's dead. It's not a big deal. He wasn't innocent, but he is part of my gang. And Catwoman's like, okay, fair enough. So, well, like, what's going on here? And he's like, well, I should ask you the same thing. Why are you showing up? And he's like, oh, well, I got a tip about there being a murder on this corner. I was trying to be heroic, I guess. And then they both run away as the police arrive, saying how someone is launching an attack on the Badlands, which, by the way, the Badlands is just the poor part of Gotham, which almost sounds like an oxymoron, but I guess it's true. And so they both run off. We then go to Gotham PD, and we see Alvarez and Keyes? I'm going to say Keyes. The two detectives who are basically trying to come down, okay, who's all involved in this? And Keyes is like, it's Catwoman. She was seen at the murder. She's awful. She's just a bad person, blah, blah, blah. And Alvarez is trying to stick up for Catwoman, saying like, no, that's not really her type. She doesn't really do that sort of thing. But Keyes just has a dead set on her. And we see Catwoman is watching this happen through the camera that she planted there like 4 issues ago. And then in walks Detective Bullock into the room, and they're just like, all right, guys, you work on Vice, which is theft stuff, I guess. No more. This is now a investigation into a murder because there are at least 3 dead kids because of whatever it is you guys are investigating. And Bullock covers up the camera accidentally, and apparently that means Catwoman can't hear anything either. Okay. So either way, Bullock's like, what's Catwoman doing up there? That's a stupid lead. And Alvarez is like, I agree. It's kind of not what we want. Keyes is like, guys, she's at the scene. That makes her suspicious. We keep her picture up. And then Bullock's like, okay, well, that guy, that guy, that guy, and that guy are all Penguin's men. So I think we should put Penguin's picture up a little bit above Catwoman's. Don't you agree? So we then go to Penguin's lair where they're testing out the Catwoman silhouette sensing robots, whatever. And he's telling Gwen, like, hey, I'm doing this because Catwoman refuses to work for me. If you tell her she works for me now, and she does, then I'll call off this hit. She'll work under me. And Gwen's like, she doesn't really work for anybody, so that's not gonna work. What if I can just get her to stay out of the Badlands? And Penguin's like, are you listening to a word I'm saying here? No, she has to work for me. Now tell her that or get out. And then we see Penguin talking to the guy who's making the rockets, and he's like, yep, they're all ready, all set to go. You can push the big red button whenever you want, and there's a camera on it so you can watch her die. And he's like, fantastic. Also, here's my backup plan. And we see that Hypnotic, who has been introduced at some various points, I think in like Detective Comics. He's a dude with hypnosis, and they got a bag over his head, and they're like, hey, Hypnotic, we have got your family, or something like that. We need you to work for us. And so he's going to do whatever he wants. We go down to the morgue, and we see Bullock, Alvarez, and Keyes looking at the bodies, and like, there's a whole bunch of weird jibber jabber here about like, oh, it's weird. It's almost like the guy was holding the explosive. As far as I can tell, none of it means anything. The only thing that they have is that this one girl is killed with a blade to the back of her head, and she has some weird dark substance on her lips. So Bullock says, go out and investigate who caused that. So they go out to the Badlands, and they're asking around some of the locals. Alvarez takes a dog walker, Keyes takes a drunk guy, and they both mention the same thing of an ice cream truck that comes by. And at that exact moment, they hear the sound of the ice cream truck. It pulls up, and it starts firing off tons of bullets at everyone around, just all around it. And Catwoman comes in to save Detective Keyes, and one of the randos there gets shot. And then Keyes immediately turns around and is like, Catwoman, yeah, I'm arresting you for murder. I'm bringing you in. And Alvarez is like, okay, back off. Clearly, she's not the one who did it. And Catwoman whips away their guns and says, all right, look, I'm not your guy, but you want to look into black ice. That's your only hint. Now I got to go see a bird about a tuxedo. So next day, Gwen and Catwoman make their way to a woman named Alice, who is apparently very good with techno stuff. And they're paying her a good amount to make a anti-homing device something. Like, that's all that they said. So she made a cloak that's made of Kevlar and is like thermal hiding. So as long as she's in that, she should be safe from homing devices. And then she also made a laser gun that can reverse the homing on any rockets and send it back to its owner. So that's a thing. Anyway, Penguin presses the big red button and rocket fires off. And like, it hits a couple of birds on the way there. And Penguin's like, yeah, oh God, that killed some birds. And they're like, yeah, it's a rocket, man. It's gonna hit some birds. So Catwoman's just standing on a rooftop waiting for it to show up. A bunch of birds, again, get hit. And the rocket starts approaching her. She tries firing the gun. It doesn't work. So she dodges out of the way and uses the cloak to hide herself from it. And so it just stops being a rocket and starts being a drone, just hovering in place, until she shows her body again. And then it charges her. And she just plays the same as like a what's the word? Matador. And just says Olay as it goes by her cape. So at that point, she calls up Alice and says, hey, your gun's not working. She's like, did you turn off the safety? And she's like, yeah, did you turn off the safety? Fine, I'll turn off the safety. So she turns it off, hits it, and then it immediately goes back and blows up Penguin. And you think we're close to done here, but no. So at that point, she makes her way back to Penguin's lair. Everyone's knocked out except for Penguin. And Penguin's like, oh, congrats. You played that beautifully. Allow me to reward you. And she, like, really gets on Penguin. Not for the rocket itself, but she's saying, you killed a lot of birds, Penguin. I'm not kidding you. And so at that point, she sees the ice cream truck is also just parked in the same room. And she's like, oh, and you're also putting drugs in the ice cream. That's unforgivable. Poisoning children and killing birds. So some random thugs come in and manage to grab Catwoman. Hypnotic gets her dazed and confused long enough for her to be handcuffed, and then they go down to the lower floor, and Penguin just gives this whole speech on like, you know, nature doesn't take care of the runts of the litter. We have to step in and we have to change that. And that's all I do here. And Catwoman's like, maybe the runts deserve to die. You ever think that's the natural order of things? And Penguin's like, you suck, Catwoman. She's like, fair enough. And she takes a little birdie out of a nest and she puts it into the hood that they're keeping over Hypnotic's head so he doesn't hypnotize anybody else. And Hypnotic starts freaking out. And so one of the henchmen removes the hood. He hypnotizes all of the henchmen, and Catwoman's got like basically just strangling him, saying like, you're going to hypnotize all these guys to uncuff me and therefore let me go. And so he does, they do, and she just tosses Penguin over onto a nest of eggs, saying like, all right, now run back to your heat lamp. And then as she's running out, she says, oh, hey, Penguin's got this same sort of thing that I saw in the Gotham Underground, which I couldn't care less about because it's one panel, but I know it's going to be critical because that's just how these stories are structured. Anyway, back to Gotham PD. Keyes is now even more locked in on Catwoman, saying how she's going to break all the laws just to bring Catwoman in for justice. And Alvarez is like, that seems wrong, but all right, whatever. Bullock goes to the mayor's office because there's a toxicology report on the ice cream that came in. Catwoman decides to partner up with the Rat Tail gang in order to fight this war against Penguin. And Penguin says, oh, Catwoman's made new friends. I'm going to make it rain bombs on the Badlands. Which, if you remember, is the last line of the last issue. Which means that actually not a goddamn thing has changed. Okay. It's not the worst issue that Ann Nocenti has put out, even of Catwoman. It's readable, it's standalone, it's okay. But, like, it's so dumb. It is so incredibly stupid, just the entire way through. So, do I like it? Obviously not. Do I think that it's worth above a 5? No. There's nothing in this issue that feels like it justifies its own existence. Because, again, nothing has changed. We don't even get a better understanding of any of these characters, like, from a, like, we didn't explore anything. We didn't do anything. And by the time we're at the end of this issue, it's the exact same. The only thing we got out of this was the introduction of this character, Alice, who cares? Who cares about this character? You could have introduced them at any other point. This did not need to exist. Anyway, it's a, I don't even know. It's like a 4. I'm giving it a 4 simply because it is technically unoffensive. It does not do anything that's absolutely awful. As much as the Matador thing and the "you're killing birds" thing are stupid, they're just laughably stupid. Not like, oh god, please let this end stupid. So yeah, I'm giving it a 4, and I'm done with this. Red Hood and the Outlaws Annual Number 1, written by James Tynion IV, art by Al Barrionuevo. So this picks up immediately after issue 20. We have Jason with no memory. Corey was apparently lying to Roy, and Green Arrow's on the way because they have a big bounty on their heads. This issue picks up with some rando who is caught and impaled in a bunch of different ways, and they're like mocking him for stealing from him or something, and apparently he's a master of robo-ninja martial arts. So he gets his throat slit open. It's purple blood, mind you. And then they say, oh, by the way, she's approaching the island. And the main guy with a bunch of claws is like, good, the Red Hood now belongs to us, and his friends belong to the Crows. So then we see this, I don't know, helicopter. It's like super high tech for no reason, is crashing down onto this island, and a bunch of like animals on the island all turn out to be robots, and they say, oh, intruder, alert the Roy. And we see a Green Arrow has impaled them and chopped them apart. We then cut over to Jason, who is an amnesiac at this point, and he's like, you know, all these so-called friends, they keep on saying I'm a good guy, but like, they always kind of like avert their eyes when they say it, so I need to find out for sure. And so he sneaks into a computer room and says, computer, tell me everything you know about the Red Hood. And so the big screen pops up and it says, Red Hood, confirmed kill count 83 people. And he's like, I'm not a good person at all. So then we go into Roy's bedroom, and he's lying in bed with Starfire, and he's thinking back to years ago when he was in therapy sessions with Hugo Strange. And Hugo's like, hey, look, we've made some great progress here, and you've told me a lot of secrets that I'm totally not going to exploit, but like, do you feel like Green Arrow truly trusts you, Roy? And Roy's like, no, he doesn't. And we see how earlier that week he's the guy at the computer, he's yelling into Ollie's ear, and he's like, dude, I made you a bunch of specialty arrows specifically for this situation. Why aren't you using them? And Arrow's like, I don't have time for this. I'm shutting you off. And he turns off the comms. 2 hours later, he shows up, and Roy is drunk. And he's like yelling at him, like, you brought me in to help you build the tech. Why won't you let me help you? And Arrow's like, no, you're not going out in the field, Roy. So then we see Hugo is saying, like, you know, trust is the bedrock of any relationship. You need to be able to trust. So then cut back to now. The robots have sent an alert that something is on the island, and he goes out to check it, and he looks over at Starfire, and it's like, hey, are you awake? We really need to talk about the fact that you haven't told me truthfully, like, things in your life, and I need trust. So we're going to talk about that when you wake up. And so he walks out. But of course, she was already awake. So then we see, again, back in the therapy session, he's like, yeah, no, I was like stealing money from ATMs and I got put in jail and Green Arrow came and he busted me out. And I wanted to make a difference. I wanted to be like his tech guy. But then I also wanted to get out there and like join him. Like that would have made everything perfect. So then we cut to the island where Green Arrow is still being attacked by a bunch of robotic animals on the beach. And Arsenal's like, geez, what are you doing here, man? I don't want to deal with you right now. And he's like, yeah, no, I don't want to deal with you either, but you and your friends are in danger. So Starfire gets up at that point, and she's like, oh, I should go talk to Roy. Like, he seemed really upset. And as she's flying through the hallways, all the lights suddenly go out. And she doesn't know where she's walking anymore. The robots get a hold of Green Arrow, and he's just like, all right, look, I don't want you here, regardless of what you're saying. Like, you like get off my island. And he says, no, you don't understand. I got this hit that you and your friends have $500 million on your head each, and they're going to come to try to find you. But I came here to tell you that first, so that way you had at least a heads up. And Roy says, you know, we were on a super secret island, and you just suddenly learned about this, and you came into my super secret island that nobody else should know about, and you don't think that doesn't sound like a trap? And then at that exact same point, we see Starfire in the darkness tries to light up her powers, but it turns out that there was a bunch of gasoline that has been laid down, and so it all just ignites and she explodes. And Roy's like, see, look, that's the trap. You made my island unsafe now. Dang it. And so he's like, all right, help me out. And he frees Green Arrow from the robots, and he's like, all right, you're going to help me and my friends. So then we see Starfire inside is facing down Cheshire, an assassin who uses poison stuff. And she's like, hey, I figured that you were impervious, but when you lit up that gasoline, all the oxygen got burned out of the room, and therefore what you're breathing in right now is just pure poison that's disintegrating your lungs. I figured if I can't get the poison through your skin, I'll get it through your body. So you're going to die, like, right now. And Arsenal comes in and is like, oh God, what did you do to Starfire? And immediately Cheshire is able to go intangible, I guess. And so she dodges all the arrows and is like, oh, hey, you and the Reg, you're pretty cute. Like, why don't you go ahead and give chase to me? So at that point, Arsenal tells Green Arrow, go get Jason. He's not himself right now. He needs protection. I'm going to take care of her. And he's just like, you can't beat her alone, Roy. And it's like, well, I don't want to beat her with you, so go do what I said. So we see another flashback where he's dressed up as Speedy and he's trying to give a help to Green Arrow. And Green Arrow just takes his gear, throws it in the trash and says, I'm not going to be responsible for you dying. And he's just like, you don't believe in me. So then we see the fight between Cheshire and Arsenal. She's got the upper hand just consistently to the point where she's basically flirting with him the whole time, saying like, oh boy, I bet your fingers are nice and strong from the bowstring. And Arsenal, best panel here, says, stop being sexy and fight me, damn it. I like that one. So she blows some poison at him, which takes him out momentarily. And we see Green Arrow is trying to get to Jason, and Jason's like, get off of me! I don't know you! And he's just like, geez, what is wrong with you kids? God. So Cheshire takes Arsenal's hat and is like, oh, well, I'm going to take this as a memoriam, and I got to go with a friend to visit. And she phases through the walls to get to Jason, takes out Green Arrow pretty much immediately, and when she gets up to Jason, she's like, hey, look, you can drop the amnesia act. Like, I know we know each other. Like, we're all cool, right? And he's like, nuts. I have no idea who you are. And she's like, okay. So at that point, Arsenal manages to get to his feet. He rushes into the room and tries to fire off another shot. Of course, it does nothing. And so he gets extra super poisoned by Cheshire, saying like, all right, well, like there's no coming back from this one. You'll be dead in a matter of seconds. So Green Arrow goes over to Arsenal being like, oh, God, stop trying to like die on me and tell me where I can find the antidotes in your belt. And so he flips open all the belt stuff, gets out the antidote, and cures Roy. At this point, Cheshire's still talking to Jason, being like, okay, here's the thing, like, we don't care about your friends, we care about you, because you used to train with me. You said that you wanted to be a killer, and now there's going to be a war that's going on, and we want you back on our side. And he's like, I'll never join you. And he's like, all right, well then I'm just going to poison you, whatever. At that point, Starfire comes to, grabs Cheshire so fast she can't even go intangible, flies her off the island, and Cheshire's like, okay, that's impressive. You survived. I'll admit that. But regardless, I can't quite be captured yet. So just know there's a war coming and you and your friends are on the wrong side of it. And she blows some poison in Starfire's face, turns intangible, and disappears. So at that point, Jason turns to Roy and just like, you lied to me. You said that we were good guys. And he's like, look, it's complicated. I can't explain to you what an anti-hero is with you being all stupid and whatnot. And he's like, no, I'm not an anti. Like, I killed 83 people. This is not good people things. And Starfire comes in like, oh, what's he bitching about now? He's like, don't talk about me like I'm not here. Just, I'm done. Whatever you guys are okay with is clearly not what I'm okay with. I'm out of here. And he runs off into the jungle. And Green Arrow's like, so is anyone going to clue me in on what's happening here? And Arsenal's just like, no, I still don't want you here. I still don't forgive you. Because, I was going through a tough time. And when you threw me away, when you said, like, get out of here, I was sober. Like, that wasn't even the excuse at that point. You just didn't trust me. So, no, I'm done. So at that point, Starfire also goes her separate way. We see another therapy session where Hugo Strange is like, oh, do you think there's any saving you and Green Arrow's relationship? And we see a fight scene between the two of them. It's just like, nah, we're done. Like, that's never going to come back. So Starfire and Roy meet back up at the doors of his place, and she's just like, why don't you ever talk about Green Arrow? And he's like, oh, I'm sorry, are we talking about memories that you should have told other people? Yeah, I didn't think so. And they see a note on the door from Jason saying like, I'm out. I'm not coming back. Goodbye. And he's like, we're on an island. How could he possibly get off the island? And we see Green Arrow in that high-tech helicopter thing calling into the JLA saying like, hey, I'd really appreciate this favor of you guys just not messing with the Red Hood gang and Arsenal and whatnot. It's just, I don't want those two series overlapping. And Amanda Waller's like, fair enough. This is the only time I'm going to be reasonable. So we see Jason has managed to stick himself to the underside of the helicopter in order to get off the island. And then we see the bad guys from the beginning saying, Cheshire discovered the island and has also gotten their power levels and their strengths and weaknesses. So we're all set to go now. And we see that the main villain is Bronze Tiger and the League of Assassins, ready to take what is rightfully theirs. It's still setting up. Here's the thing. That's like last issue and the issue beforehand where James Tynion just kind of like starting off saying, okay, we're wiping the slate clean. We're getting to a new status quo. Jason has his mind wiped. Everyone is kind of in shambles. We're building it back up again. But now we're finally getting the conflict of what's going to bring them back, which is, of course, Bronze Tiger, who I always thought was a dude. But in this, he's a tiger dude. Like, his head is a tiger. Just pointing that out. They're going to be the ones that are obviously the central focus that are, this war is coming, blah, blah, blah. So I'm into it. I'm interested. I want to see moving forward here what's going to happen, how they're going to get Jason back in the fray, how Arsenal and Starfire are going to make up. I do think that it seems like it's going to be mostly an Arsenal-centric storyline, which I think is good because when Lobdell had control over it, we got a couple things that were Jason, and we got that Starfire basically entire arc of her in space. So I'm looking forward to seeing, all right, what can we do with Arsenal here? So overall, art's fine. Pacing, it's good. It's fine. I don't think that this really needed to be an annual. This felt more like 2 issues, and they just kind of condensed it down while also adding this weird therapy bit to it. But I don't know. It seemed like it might have been a bit too packed, but based off of what it was, I think it was fine. So I'm going to give this one a 7 overall. It's good. It's an okay. It's not standalone. It is just the next part of the arc, but it's fine for what it is. Earth 2 Annual Number 1, written by James Robinson, art by Cafu and Julius Gopez. So this kind of feels like setup for the next arc. It definitely doesn't come out of the last one. So we pick up on a jet holding Al Pratt, who is aka the Atom, and they're flying to Cambodia, where there's some city called Phnom Penh. And they're going there for whatever reason. And Al's kind of out of it. He's just like thinking about his past. It's basically just a backdoor origin story where they were fighting 5 years ago. A huge explosion with like nukes came off and all of his crew got atomized except for him. And so he's brought in for some testing. They go crazy hard on that. And then his therapist is like, okay, well, Sergeant Pratt, you somehow survived a nuke and nobody can figure out why. But I'm your psychiatrist and I just want to know, are you feeling okay? Are you happy? Can you smile for me? And he's just like, no, because like all I can think of is my friends dying around me. And he gets some PTSD. He freaks out and he grows to a massive size, crashing through the building. And so then we see more time skips happen of him fighting some parademons and whatnot out in the outskirts of like Russia. And he's back with the therapist and just be like, well, we still don't know why that happens, but now you can grow to supersize and you also have atomic punches. And we still have just no explanation. So, again, I'm your therapist. And she also points out, like, by the way, your clothes grow with you? What's that about? But either way, are you happy? And she's just like, happy? Nah, I wouldn't say happy, but like, I'm happier. I realize I don't need to have survivor's guilt as much, but I do still feel responsible. Like, maybe that's the wrong word. I don't know. I feel like I have a job to do, and I need to do it in honor of them. So at that point, just like, well, yeah, no, and congratulations on your promotion. You go out there fighting with Captain Steel, which we did see during one of the flashbacks here. And he's just like, yeah, no, Captain Steel, he's great. He's super smart and whatnot. And the more I learn how much more I still need to learn. And he's like, well, yeah, that's progress. So anyway, back in the present day, he's still just thinking about it. They arrive at Phnom Penh, and he's like, all right, let me get my clothes on. And we see him put on like stereotypical tourist gear. He's trying to blend in to this place, which is apparently just the seediest place in the world. Like, they sell all this technology from Apocalypse and also World Army stuff, and everyone's just kind of totally evil here. And he goes around asking for a guy named Henry Roy, saying that he's got information for him. And as he asks around, getting the name out there, he eventually gets kidnapped by some people. And he's like, oh, you know, around this time, I always ask myself the same thing. Why didn't they send Captain Steel instead? Then we get an interlude where Captain Steel is talking to Commander Khan, and Khan's like, hey, what do you know about the fire pits? And he's just like, they were made by Terry Sloan, and they like have varying degrees of awfulness about them. And Khan's like, yep, nope, that's pretty much it. Sometimes you can have a city built pretty much right on top of one and it won't cause any issues. Other ones, you can't get within 100 miles of it. Like, we don't understand anything about the fire pits. So that's an issue. And Captain Steel's like, okay, so you want me to go investigate one of the fire pits? He's like, well, kind of. We want to send you into a fire pit. And that's the end of the interlude. So then we go back to Pratt, who's been captured. And they're punching him, torturing him, saying, like, what do you want with Roy? And he's just like, I just want to give him some information. And in the shadows, we see a very bat-like silhouette. And he's just like, yeah, no, I'm only going to give the info to him because otherwise one of you guys is going to take credit for it and I miss out on my payday. And he's like, fine, all right, whatever. And one of the guys decloaks, and turns out it is this businessman named Henry Roy. And he's like, all right, so we've already scanned you. You don't have any communication stuff on you. You don't have any weapons. You're not a threat. So what do you want to tell me? And it's just like, I want to tell you that the World Army knows where you are. And he's like, oh, how do they know that? And it's like, your own son sold you out. And he's like, oh, okay, well, thanks for the info, but why should I pay you for it? And he's like, oh, I don't care if you pay me for it. You were talking before about the World Army. I am the World Army. And then all of a sudden he grows up to his big size. And all of the henchmen around have like Apocalypse tech, so they are firing on Adam, and it seems like it does a little bit, but it's really not taking him down. He uses his punches to throw down some big stuff. And then all of a sudden, Henry Roy has jumped himself into a mech. And he has a full-on, like, kaiju battle with Adam. And they just start blasting their way out of buildings, like, jumping over them, attacking each other. We see some of the henchmen also have some high-tech armor. And it's enough to basically disorient Adam for a while. To which we then see this new Batman, whose secondary color is red, is blasting out some explosives to take out the goons. And Adam doesn't see Batman, but he's just like, all right, well, those goons are no longer after me. Time to focus on the mission. And so he's leaping over buildings, chasing after Henry, and finally in the end he gets him, tacks him to the ground. And as he does so, we hear a voice from the side. It is Major Sonia Sato from the World Army, who I guess we've seen before. They say that we have. I don't remember her. But regardless, they're like, oh, what are you here for? Here to clean up after me? And Sonia's like, I am your superior officer, thank you very much. But no, Steppenwolf is back. He's in Durain, so we've got kind of a thing going on. So he shrinks back down. He goes to talk to Sonya. And basically they're saying they're launching back up the Heroes Initiative. Which, yes, that is just the Avengers. It's said the exact same way. And he's just like, look, if that's what the World Army wants to do, I'm happy to serve. But, like, also, isn't Terry Sloan the one who's in charge of that? And he's just like, no. He's just in charge of the science stuff. Like, I'm going to be the one in charge of the rest. I'm in charge of training and overseeing the cadets. So are you in? And he's just like, if that's what we're doing, that's what we're doing. I'm down. So at that point, Henry Roy Jr., the son who turned in his father, steps up and just being like, yeah, you know, my dad's a dick, but I did what I knew had to be right. And at that point, Adam's like, okay, but like, why should I care? Why is he here? It's like, well, it turns out Henry Roy Jr. here has always had these really, really bad headaches that have been like debilitating. And World Army scientists think that maybe, just maybe, he's got kind of like a little bit of the superpowers. So we're just going to take him in and we're just going to see if that moral compass is worth anything. So at that point, he's like, yeah, no, I want to atone for what my dad did. So at that point, we then cut over to Batman, who is watching over all this. And mind you, this isn't the original Batman, but we don't know what Batman this is. And he says, 72 hours later, I'm fighting against Mr. Icicle, real name Jaime Encana, who got some powers from Kanto, quote-unquote the assassin of Apocalypse. And we see he has ice powers. Batman's able to fight against it. He takes out Icicle and tackles him to the ground. And he's just like, okay, here's the thing. There's some rumors that Kanto is... back during the war, Kanto gave powers to like certain people and said like, you are my assassins, go for it. Rumor is that he's calling back in these markers, and if he's doing so, that means Apocalypse is making a move. And he grabs Icicle and says like, speak, what's going on? And he's just like, oh, Kanto told us to prepare, that's all he said, I swear. And Batman threatens him a little bit more, and he says, okay, fine, there was also a thing about Hawkgirl, like apparently Hawkgirl is going to be a threat, but I don't know what that's about. And Batman seemingly shoots him like point blank, like he kills him and says like, all right, Steppenwolf's kind of been on his own thing because he got abandoned here on Earth. He's not with Apocalypse anymore. But if Kanto's doing something, that means Apocalypse is still active. So I got to track down Hawkgirl and see what's up. Then we cut to Gotham City for the epilogue, and we see Barda and Mr. Miracle are there, and they're just like chasing down these horrific mutated monsters. Barda is getting some sort of cheap thrills out of killing them. Meanwhile, Mr. Miracle's like, this is kind of stupid. Like, you kind of gross me out, Barda. And Barda's like, oh, I'm sorry. Is this too much for you? And he's just like, no, but like, maybe. Regardless, we got to find this Batman guy. Like, that's the whole reason we're here. It says, it's nice to be free, obviously. I'm certainly not eager to have Steppenwolf's shackles back on me again. But we can't stay here any longer. What if the World Army sees us? And then all of a sudden, Barda's tied up in a lasso. And we see, I think her name was Fury? The one who is like Wonder Woman's daughter has captured Barda, saying like, oh, I'd say the World Army's the least of your worries. So, three separate plots going on here. In terms of the Atom and the Heroes Initiative, I like it. I mean, it sounds like the sort of thing that we were always kind of building up to, is that, okay, the World Army is preparing for the return of Steppenwolf. The Batman arc, good mystery setting up in who is this Batman. He's clearly still got the detective vibe to him. He's going around getting clues, finding out that Steppenwolf may not be the biggest threat here, which leads into a lot more story possibilities down the road. And then you got whatever the hell Mr. Miracle and Barda are doing, which was hinted at before. That was already covered that this was going to be coming up. But it's weird knowing what I know about Barda and Miracle 10 years down the road of where they are in the DC universe, because they are still new gods, which means these should still be the only ones in the multiverse. So we'll see how that shakes out. It's a bit strange, but I'm willing to give it the benefit of the doubt. I like the way they've done characterizations for pretty much everyone else here, so I'm willing to give it that little extra hope for it. So I'm going to say that this is a 7.5. It doesn't quite scratch that 8. It's good, but not great. But it is still a decent story. It's got its own stuff going on, but it does feel more like setup for the arc that's about to happen rather than being its own individual story. So, yeah, 7.5. Justice League of America number 4, written by Geoff Johns, art by Brett Booth. Last issue, Catwoman got captured on purpose by the Secret Society, because sure. And this issue picks up with a Argus doctor named Dr. Arthur Light being called up by Amanda Waller, saying, hey, something's come up, we need you to come in, get in here. And he's like, yeah, okay, I'm on my way. So we see Catwoman all tied up, and she's like, hey, Colonel Trevor, I'm currently strapped to a chair. I don't even know if you can hear me. I know you said I should sit and wait, but I gotta stretch my paws. And so she gets out of the chair and breaks out of the room and just starts investigating the place. Meanwhile, we see what Dr. Light was called in for, and it's the little coin thing that Green Arrow got from the Secret Society. And he's like, yeah, it's got some Latin on it. One side says, let them hate as long as they fear. The other side says, forever evil. And he's like, okay, yeah, great, but I hope I wasn't interrupted at 3:30 in the morning for Latin. And he's like, no, so this coin is a communications device. And then Green Arrow walks in saying like, yeah, I picked it up off of Multiplex after we fought. He was using it to talk to somebody. Like something crazy's going on. And Waller talks to Steve Trevor like, hey, why is Green Arrow still here? I thought you kicked him to the curb. And he's like, well, he kind of blackmailed his way in last issue, so he's going to be here as well. Just think of him as backup from when Catwoman inevitably betrays us. So at that point, Waller's like, okay, but like, why am I here? And it says, all right, the coin is used for communications. It emits a frequency that we can detect and we can replicate, but we can't identify it. Like, we can't quite make it work. And so they say, all right, we think that when we went into the place last time, all of our comms were shut down. We think that there was a loophole to let this specific frequency through, but we're having trouble connecting to the frequency that we gave to Catwoman because we think that it might be made by a metahuman. You are the utmost authority on energies made by metahumans, so can you help us duplicate it? And he's like, I'll do it for America. So at that point, the rest of the JLA go into the hangar and they see Colonel Trevor's fancy new plane. And it's like, oh yeah, no, we've got like armories on this. It's super duper sonic. Like no one can be able to see it. And they're like, okay, but Justice League has like super senses. They should be able to see it. And he says, no. You understand. Like this thing is top of the line super camo. It could fool Superman. And I call it the Invisible Jet. And I'm not going to kid you here, just as a little behind the scenes. I threw my book once they said that because like it's so obvious. And I was so annoyed that they did it. But like it's fine looking back. It's fine. It's not great. It's fine. So they're flying in. They finally get a lock on where Catwoman is. She's in northern Minnesota. And it's like, all right, well, you guys should be there by sunrise. That's when Stargirl's going to start her talk on the radio. By the way, where is Stargirl? And we see Stargirl is hitched a ride on top of the invisible jet because she's sick of sitting back and being the spokesperson. So Catwoman's roaming around the Secret Society building, and it's like, oh, this guy has a lot of globes and a map of the Batcave. What the heck? Who is this guy? So then outside we see they've made their way through the woods, and they have discovered this manor that was the same one Green Arrow saw before, but now it's in Minnesota. Katana walks up and just slices open the front door, and Stargirl kind of sneaks up behind, making sure she's not noticed. So it kind of keeps jumping between the Catwoman story and the rest of the people. So just to say what the rest of the people are up to, they make their way into this building. They see more robotic Justice Leaguers in the form of Flash and Aquaman. And then all of a sudden they hear a noise, and out from the wall bursts the Shaggy Man, this giant Bigfoot looking guy. And they all start fighting against it. And as Katana manages to land some hits on it, they see that it is robotic. So then Martian Manhunter jumps in and he's like, don't worry, everybody, I can take care of this. But then the Shaggy Man uses fire against Martian Manhunter, and he clearly is a bit out of his range. And Shaggy Man apparently goes back and fights the rest of the League as well. So that all happened. Meanwhile, Catwoman has made her way through this building, and she ends up getting caught by Dr. Ivo. And she's like, Dr. Ivo, I thought you exploded in that lab explosion. And he's like, that's what I let everyone think. Anyway, come along. We need to go have a talk with our leader. And Catwoman's like, oh, well, let me get changed first. And then she throws this disc at Ivo and manages to get him restrained and knocks him out. She goes running through the building, and she's stopped by Signal Man and I think it was Blockbuster. And she gets grabbed by, I think it's Copperhead. It's a Snake Man. I don't know, man. It's a lot of people just showing up. And Copperhead knocks her out. She wakes up, she comes to, and there's this pale-looking dude in a purple suit. Kind of looks like the Joker, but I don't think it is. And she's just like, hey, we captured you and your friends are downstairs. And I was like, what friends? I don't have friends. It's like, okay, well, we know you're lying because your friends are downstairs. And they're fighting our Shaggy Man. And so at that point, he pulls out a gun from his cane and says, if you don't start talking, I'm going to kill you right now. And she's like, if you kill me, Batman's going to come after you, and he's not going to rest until he finds you. And the guy's like, you idiot, that's exactly what we want. And so he shoots her in the head, and she is dead. I cannot see any way that she gets out of this. She is dead. And then one last thing that's also happening right at the end here is Dr. Light hears a voice coming from the coin. It says, hello, Dr. Light. And then all of a sudden it gives off this massive burst of energy, which is surely going to give him some powers because his name is Dr. Light. And we all know Dr. Light is a DC character. So, yeah. All that happened. It's fine. It's a fine issue. It's not, it does feel like we're kind of at a net zero here of things that have actually happened, because Catwoman, I mean, don't get me wrong, a lot has happened, but I don't feel like anything that is actually forwarding the plot. And just to give you a perspective on things, I think it's in either next issue or the issue after that is the official start of Trinity War, which of course involves this book. It kind of feels like we're just doggy paddling until we get to that point. Like we're just barely moving at all, inching the plot ahead until finally we get to oh, right, we're part of this bigger event now. It's fine, but it doesn't feel like it's making as many great strides in story progression as pretty much any other book that's coming out. So I'll give this one I got to give it a flat 7 because honestly, the art's not even there this time. It's Brett Booth, not the best. So yeah, I'll give it a flat 7. And I got to say most of that is just for, it's keeping me on my toes. I do like the developments, however few they are, that are happening. I can't say I can really predict where this book is headed at any given moment. So it's got that going that's at least unpredictable and not in a bad writing sort of way. But that's about all I can give it at the moment. So 7 for that. And that's it. That's all the comics that came out this May 29th, 2013. But you know we ain't done. You know I've got backup stories to talk about. You can see the runtime of this episode. I don't know how long it's going to be, but it feels like a while. So, for those of you who don't understand what's happening here, at the end of certain comics, there is a little extra bit of story that is not part of the main story, usually, and I have decided that on fifth weeks, I am going to cover those in those episodes, because usually there's not enough comics to fill up a whole episode. However, this time around, it's been 5 months since the last one of these, and I have built up a little bit too many to get done. So, I am going to go ahead and just say right up front, there are 2 of them that I should have done, but I'm going to delay. And that is Action Comics number 20 and All-Star Western number 20. My reasoning for them is that they are both part 1s of 2-part stories in the backups. And it seems kind of stupid to just cover that without having the finale ready. So I'm going to save that for the next one, which thankfully is only in 2 months' time. But yeah, that's that. As for things I'm going to be talking about here, all the timestamps are going to be in the description, but we have backup stories from Batman, Detective Comics, Action Comics, Threshold, Justice League of America, and All-Star Western. And what could charitably be called a proof of concept coming out of Superboy, but you'll see my thoughts when I get there. But all that withstanding, we are doing this in the same order as the show, so let's jump right into the backup stories from Batman. Ghost Lights, written by James Tynion IV, art by Alex Maleev. This is the backup story to Batman number 19 and 20. So, the only thing you really need to know going into this is that Robin just died, and Batman's still not totally over that. So, we pick up on 2 cops who are responding to a call of people going into this building and then not coming back out. And they're just like hassling each other of like, man, we were like 5 minutes until we were off our shift and you called in this one. And as they make their way in, they see this bright glowing light and they follow it into this apartment. And when they get inside, the camera stays outside, but we just hear screaming, and then one of the cops runs outside. He sees Detective Bullock come up and he's like, oh, dude, what's up with you? Why are you freaking out? And he's just like, help me, call in everybody. Freaking out, man. So Bullock calls in a bunch of cops, and we see Batman is watching over the scene. And coming up next to him, saying, you've been ignoring my calls, is Superman. And he's like, look, do you want to talk? Like, I know you're going through a lot right now. And he's like, yeah, I don't really want to talk, but if you want to be here, do something useful and scan that building. 6 people have gone in, and no one's come out in the last 24 hours. And so Superman does his x-ray vision, but he's like, that's weird. I can't actually see into that building. Like, something's stopping my vision. And he's like, well, guess you're coming with then. Let's go. So they make their way into the building. And Superman's still just like, seriously though, like, if you ever need to talk, I am literally only ever a few minutes away. And Batman's like, would you just stay focused and tell me what you see? And Superman keeps on using his vision, but he's like, it's weird. Like, it's hard to describe to someone who doesn't have supervision, but like the light in this area is not correct. And he's saying how he's getting this feeling of nausea in his stomach, and he doesn't even know what it is. Batman's the one who labels it as nausea. So at that point, they look down the hall and they see the ghost light. And Superman's the one who calls it the ghost light. Batman's like, oh, it's got a bunch of different names like Will-o'-the-Wisp and Hobby Lantern and stuff like that. And Clark is like, yeah, but in Kansas, we call it the ghost light, and you were never, ever supposed to go after it, or else you wouldn't be seen again. And Batman's like, well, I think I can handle it just fine. So they make their way into the room, and they see this, like, summoning circle and a bunch of dead bodies in the corner. And Superman is just not okay. Like, he is getting sicker by the second here. And the door slams behind them, and we see that there is the ghost of this girl sitting in this room. And she's like, why'd you follow the light? You shouldn't have come in here and followed the light. And Superman's like, okay, I can't even, like, look at her. Like, she's genuinely painful to look at. And Batman's like, yeah, okay, this is actual supernatural stuff, and Superman, you can't deal with magic, so I'm just gonna take the lead on this one and you hang back. So he asks questions. He's like, hey, all right, can you hear me? What happened to all this stuff and what's going on? And she's like, yeah, it's me and my friend. We set up this circle. He started it. His body's right over there. And we summoned the thing. And he's like, what thing? He's like, oh, that thing. And points up, and there's this giant, horrific looking monster that she calls the Will of the Wisp. And then we get the backstory that it was the two friends. They were trying to summon it, but they thought, it was just a silly joke. And if they stayed into a circle of salt, they would stay protected. So they did end up summoning it, but then they saw the little glowing ball thing, and they stepped outside the circle, and immediately their souls were ripped from their body by the giant monster. However, the monster was busy enough with her friend's soul that her soul was able to get back into the circle, and now she's being protected. And the Will-O-Wisp is trying to get enough souls that it is just able to roam free here on Earth and be free of its little confinement circle. So Superman's currently fighting it off, but of course he's not able to fight against magic that well, so it is actually a hard fight for him. Will-O-Wisp is actually trying to absorb his soul as well, which would make it unstoppable. So at that point, Batman's turning to the girl like, okay, did your friend memorize the spell, or did he read it off something? It's like, oh, he read it off something, but I don't know where it is. I'm so confused. I'm so lost. And Batman tells her, like, hey, what's your name? It's Becca. Okay, Becca, I need you to just focus here for a minute. Really think about that, because over there, Superman, that's my friend. And he is actually not going to survive this fight if you can't help me out here. And so she points over to the corner where the spell was. It's written all in Gaelic runes, which I guess Batman's able to read and recite, but he tells Superman that he needs the Gaelic phrase for cast out or expel, which Superman just has on hand. So then Batman starts throwing out the spell, and he uses a fire batarang to light all the candles that have been extinguished in here, and Superman's getting his soul sucked out of his body at this point. So Batman says the spell. It sends the Will-O-Wisp back into the magic plane or whatever, and Superman's like, okay, yeah, I'm feeling better. I think we got it handled. And Becca starts fading away, and Becca's like, oh, hey, yeah, I guess that makes sense. I need to go as well. By the way, Superman, you take care of Batman. He seems like a cool dude. And Superman's like, yeah, I'll keep that in mind. So Batman turns to Superman and was like, look, thank you for coming. Thank you for asking if I want to talk. I really don't, and I'm not ready to right now. But, like, thank you for coming. And he's like, yeah, of course. He's like, yeah, and if you want to maybe join on my patrol tonight, I wouldn't be totally against that. And as Superman turns to say something, he realizes that Batman has Batmaned out of the scene. And he's like, oh, you're doing that to me now? Hell of a friend you are. So, yeah, that's a little two-parter. It's good. It's just a nice little solid story. It's the first time that it's just been Batman, Superman really interacting in, I think, either of the books. I think there may have been like one much earlier on in Action Comics, I think, but for the most part, this just feels like the sort of setup to something that we're gonna get in Batman Superman. So I enjoyed it. I think the Maleev art is great. It's perfectly moody while still giving this, like, I don't want to say magical tone to it, but that is the right word. So it's a great little short story here. Probably would have been fine for its own single issue, but splitting it up across two backups works just as well. So I'm gonna give it I'll give it an 8, honestly. I think the voices are there and the art looks great, so I have nothing to really complain about. It's a fine story. The Detective Comics backup stories written by John Layman. Over the course of issues 16 to 20, there were a total of 7 different backup stories written by John Layman, various different artists. I'm just going to give a surface level overview for all of them and give you a general sense, because they all were forwarding the story in their own ways. So we start off with issue 16, art by Andy Clark. Story is Pecking Order, and it is opening with Ogilvy shooting off a guy's face saying, here's what we're going to do, we're going to blame the Joker. And we see Ogilvy goes to a police scene. It is the part where Penguin is forced to join the Joker, and like a whole bunch of mobsters have been killed. I think it was a backup story in Batman. Ogilvy finds out about it, and he's like, oh, sweet, awesome. So he gets together a bunch of different of Penguin's men and says, here's the thing. We're going to basically kill a whole bunch of gang members, and we're going to blame the Joker for it, and that'll let us get off scot-free. And everyone's like, who the hell are you, kid? Where's Penguin? It's like, Penguin's no longer an issue. Now it's me, and I'm Emperor Penguin. And everyone's like, that's stupid. You're going to get killed, man. And also, like, when we kill people, we do it for respect reasons. We don't do it to, like, hide behind the Joker. And basically, Emperor Penguin steps up and is just like, nah, like, this is the new way we're doing things. Anyone got a problem with that? And he blows off the guy's face and says, that's my answer to that. So who's in? And everyone's like, yep, all in, Emperor Penguin. That sounds good to me. So good first step for the Emperor Penguin kind of building out, because that was the point where Penguin left, was issue 16. So it's building him up. It's letting him have this little background thing going on. It's a good way to forward the story. I give that, like, I would say that's a good 7. Not quite as high as as great of an issue, but it's a good 7. Next we go on to Doctor's Orders, art by Andy Clark again. So this is about the Merrymaker, and we see that he's meeting with the Joker. All the other doctors just wet themselves and run away, except for him and Harleen Quinzel, obviously. And he's recounting this to a therapist who's basically saying whether or not he goes to Arkham or to Blackgate. And the therapist is like, all right, well, give me the whole rundown. And Merrymaker basically says, okay, I looked at Harley and saw that she was smitten with him, and I came to the conclusion that, like, for everybody, Joker inspires something. For most people, it's fear, but for certain types of people, he just inspires them to be bigger than they are. And so he sees all these losers in life who try to emulate the Joker, and the therapist is like, you tried to cure them? And he's like, no, I'm going to manipulate them. I'm going to use them and profit off of them. So he became a therapist who solely devotes to the curing of people who have Jokeritis, or more or less. And he basically determines, like, if he can convince them as the Merrymaker that they're working for the Joker, he can make them do whatever he wants. So that's what he did in his story. But then, of course, he was stopped by Batman, and the therapist is like, okay, yeah, I think I get it. So clearly you aren't crazy. Like, you're messed up and whatnot, but you're not, like, Arkham level. And he's like, no, of course not. Just tell me where I'm going in Blackgate. And he's like, oh, Blackgate. Well, I mean, you could be labeled as a sociopath. Like, that would send you to Arkham if you were a dangerous sociopath. And he's like, what? No, you can't honestly be thinking I'm worthy of going with those freaks in Arkham. He's like, I don't know, seems kind of like it. And he stamps his file and says, yeah, this guy's insane. And he's going to Arkham. And we see as he is being loaded up in the truck, the therapist goes back to his desk and he is just doodling a whole bunch of pictures of Joker, showing that he also had that, like, level of Jokeritis, or whatever you want to call it. So, interesting story. I think it would do more if the Merrymaker were a more returning villain rather than a one-off sort of thing. But it does do a good thing to just put a capper on him and say, like, yeah, no, he got doubly screwed. Not only was he beat up by Batman, he's going to Arkham as well. So I'm going to give that one... Art's great, by the way. I give it a 6.5. It's all right. So next we have A Cut Above, a story about Victor Zsasz, art by Henrik Johnson. And we see during the time of the Joker, in between Batman's issues 16 and 17, Zsasz is about to kill Penguin, and we see a flashback to Zsasz was apparently, like, the heir to a fortune of Zsasz Industries, and he bet his whole company in the Iceberg Casino and lost it all. And he blames Penguin for that ever since. And so he's about to kill Penguin, who's here in the asylum as well. And then Joker comes up and says, I need Penguin. Why don't you scurry on out of here and do what you do, Zsasz? So he goes out and starts killing people. And then Emperor Penguin steps up and is like, hey, Zsasz, here's the thing. I know that you, A, want to hurt people, and B, want to hurt Penguin himself, Oswald Cobblepot. I've got this shiny Court of Owls knife. here. How about you do both those things at once? And Zsasz is like, all right, sounds good to me. So that's just a Victor Zsasz focus story. I did think it was weird when he popped up in issue 19. It didn't quite seem like it was forecasted, but considering that was the backup story in 18, it makes more sense now. So overall, I'd say that is I don't know. Art's not as great. I'm not as big on Henrik Johnson, so I think I'm going to just make that one a 6. So then we get into issue 19, which had 3 backup stories all included because it was an oversized issue. Most of them Man-Bat centric. So first issue is Man-Bat, Birth of a Family, Andy Clark on art. And we show Man-Bat, flying around town and whatnot, and he's just trying to keep his eye on stuff. And the narration is told from the perspective of his wife, who is Francine. And it's just like, oh, that man, Kirk Langstrom, he was so great. He was perfect. There were like some deaf kids, and he was trying to work with them to get them to be able to hear. He had deafness run in his own family. I was a laboratory assistant to him, and then we got to know each other, and I fell in love with him, and we got married. And he put forward to the scientific community this idea of the using a little bit of bat DNA to repair these kids' auditory senses. And they were like, are there any side effects? And he's like, oh, like very tiny ones, but we're working to like quell them. But then you go back to the lab and these kids have turned into mutant bat creatures. And she's just like, oh, I know he would have found a way around it. But then the serum fell into the wrong hands. He was forced to transform himself. And now I'm left here with a pile of notes and no idea what to do. But I know that a lot of bats will seek out others, even if they're solitary, even if they don't live in a colony. They'll seek out others when it's time to mate. They do care about family. So she brews up another thing of Man-Bat serum and down the hatch. So that's a thing that's going to happen is woman bat. So I like the art on that one. Andy Clark is good in that. I don't think I really needed this story. It felt a bit unnecessary, but if we're leading towards something bigger, I'll go ahead and just give it the 7 by default. It's a nice enough little lead into that. Next up is Bird Watching, art by Henrik Johnson again. This is Mr. Combustible, and we see it's when the virus is spreading around the 900 block of the Man-Bat serum. They are told by Emperor Penguin to basically rob some jewelry stores and get some wealth on them. And as they're going through, one of the henchmen takes off his gas mask, and Combustible's like, all right, well, now we have to shoot you, you idiot. And he's like, why? There's no gas around here. But then all of a sudden he starts turning into a Man-Bat, and the fellow henchmen start killing him. And they're like, all right, that means we're a man down. We're already 3 minutes behind schedule. We got to hit up like 3 other shops, so let's get going. And we show that this is all part of Emperor Penguin's plan, using all the other people who used to work for Penguin. And they basically just use the chaos of the Man-Bat serum being spread around Gotham to rob the entire city blind. And it made Emperor Penguin incredibly rich. And we see that he's recounting, Mr. Combustible is recounting all this to Oswald, who is currently in prison. And Oswald's basically chewing him out like, he's not in charge. I'm the one in charge. Why are you guys listening to him? I was like, well, he's in charge right now because you're in Blackgate. And Penguin says, all right, well, I don't plan on staying here much longer. I need you to do something for me. And so Mr. Combustible threatens the judge that is hearing Penguin's trial and tells him, like, here's what you're going to do when you get up there. And so now that the judge has been threatened, Penguin's going to get off scot-free. I'm glad this story exists in that it's a nice little bridge of exactly why did Penguin want to have this virus spread in the first place, and then also how this judge managed to get convinced to release Penguin. Because in issue 20, that was never quite explained. I'm really happy this was here. It was a nice, solid little story. I like the little D-list villains that Penguin bosses around, so I'm going to give this one a 7.5. I enjoyed it. Next up, we have Gotham's Finest in Through a Blue Lens, art by Jason Masters. Gonna say out the gate, Jason Masters, competent, not my favorite artist. So there's that. We see one of the GCPD has been turned into a Man-Bat, and he gets into a fight with Batman. He says he doesn't remember much of anything, but he remembers everything going black. And when he's in the hospital getting better, his fellow cops come up and are like, hey man, you fought Batman. You almost kicked his ass. That is awesome. And one of the cops goes overboard and he's just like, man, if only your talons were a bit longer, you could have actually killed Batman. And one of the cops is like, are you serious about like killing Batman? Surely he's not that bad. And then that cop basically lays down the law of like, Batman is the worst. Like, he is doing our job and he has no right to do that. I encountered him once and he attacked me for no reason. And then we see a flashback of like him firing his gun at Batman. And basically he makes the argument of like, without Batman, we wouldn't have all these crazies running around. It's because of him that they're even here in the first place. Like, Batman is nothing but bad for Gotham. And this rookie cop is just like, I feel like he's trying to do the right thing. Maybe he's not, like, he's doing stuff that we would never have been able to fight back against the Man-Bat stuff. And it's like, he's doing what we can't do. And a cop basically chews out the rookie saying, this is why no one wants to be your partner, because you're a bat lover. And so all the other cops leave, leaving only the rookie. But the rookie stays behind and talks to the guy who was turned into a Man-Bat. And he's like, look, I lied. I do remember my time as Man-Bat. I nearly killed an innocent woman, and it's only because Batman was there that I didn't. And he says, if once I get out of here, I'd be happy to be your partner. And they just share a drink to Batman because he's the one who's going to be watching their backs in the end. So that's a nice story. It's a nice little thing. It's good to see the difference between how some cops view Batman compared to others, and that there is this sort of schism there. I don't think the schism is a good thing to have, but it's nice to see that not everyone is just uniformly either against or supporting Batman. There is some variation on the inside. So I'm not the biggest on the art style, but I'd still give that one a 7, flat out. And then lastly, we have issue number 20's Empire of the Sun, art by Andy Clark again. And this one, apparently, we get the very quick backstory that Ogilvy, before he became assistant to Penguin, his parents were shot and killed outside the Monarch Theater by some random thug. And he's, mirroring Batman in that way. So he is, of course, sent to Blackgate after issue 20. And he's pulled out of his cell. Apparently the boss wants to talk to him. And he thinks it's the warden, but turns out it's this gangster in there who used to run like guns and stuff on Gotham East side, but now that he's on the inside, he's the boss. And he is like a bull-looking guy. And I feel like we've met him before, but I can't remember from where. So either way, boss talks to him and says like, hey, I don't like backstabbers, but I'm really glad that you like messed up Penguin because I hate that guy. So why don't you tell me why it is you do what you do? And Ogilvy says, my dad used to work for the mob. He used to be like in on them. And his motto was always like, don't rock the boat and everything will work out fine. But nothing ever worked out fine for him. Like he lost some fingers because they thought he was stealing from them. He never did. And then finally one day he was shot down in an alley because the bosses above him were making deals that just, this was the counteroffer. This was them making a point. Had nothing to do with him. He was just shot down because of it. And so he then came up underneath Penguin, started rising the ranks, and he realized like, it's not about not rocking the boat. You got to go for what you want. And that's the reason that I didn't want to rock the boat. I wanted to own the boat. And the boss is like, good story, great backstory there, but from here on, I want you working for me. So you better get used to that. And Ogilvy's like, okay, well, I've got a different plan. And he just immediately lunges at the boss and strangles him to death. And when the guard comes in, he's like, all right, I'm ready to return to my cell. And we see Ogilvy being marched down the Gen Pop, and everyone's whispering. They're like, dude, he just killed the boss. He's the biggest, baddest there is. And everyone's like, who is he? Who is he? And one person says Emperor Penguin. But then he chimes up, no. No longer am I Emperor Penguin. Now call me Emperor Blackgate. So we've got like the fourth name for this guy. I gotta say, I'm kind of disappointed by Emperor Blackgate. Not really the coolest name. I get it in that he's his own thing now. He's not trying to just be new Penguin, but like it just makes him feel like he's so much more easily thrown away because of that. Like we're never gonna see Emperor Blackgate again, probably. which is disappointing because I think there was a good story here for him and it just kind of got trampled on, as I've said numerous times in my Detective Comics reviews. So overall, I'm going to give that one I'll give it, you know what, I'll give it an 8. A, I like Andy Clark's art in it, and B, I really do appreciate that they went back and gave Ogilvy like a full backstory of explaining why he chose to betray Penguin. It wasn't just because he was an opportunist, it was because he had this drive, he had this motive behind him. So yeah, those are all the backup stories for Detective Comics, written by John Layman, and I think they do add a bit more to the story. They aren't just some ignorable piece of the comic where you don't have to read it at all. It adds to it, it furthers it, and it elaborates more on everything that's happening. So kind of wish I would have read them at the same time, looking back on it now, but beggars can't be choosers. War Council, written by James Tynion IV, art by Mikel Janin. This is the backup story in Detective Comics number 19, one of many. This one is nothing to do with Detective Comics and everything to do with Bane showing up in the pages of Talon, which James Tynion himself wrote. So we basically just have this issue as the bridge of how did Bane end up there? So we pick up with him in Santa Prisca. He's talking to his gang of randos. They all have names: Brute, Professor, Wolf Spider, and Militia. They don't matter to the story. So they're all prepped to go do something, and Bane's like, how long until our army's ready? And it's like, pretty soon. Why? What's up? And Bane is like, okay, let me tell you all what happened. So about a year ago, I wanted to intercept this nuclear weapon in Gotham. Turns out, though, that was the Night of the Owls, and I didn't know that, but they stopped me from doing my mission. And they started attacking me, so I ripped off some heads and made them pay. However, I really was curious who caused that, and of course I thought that it was Batman. I thought he was the issue here. So then the events of the first arc of Batman the Dark Knight happened, and we see Batman knocking Bane over a cliff. He ends up on the bottom and then washes up somewhere else. And when he washes up, there's a guy from the Court of Owls there. And he's like, hey, who are you? And he says, don't worry about me. Me and you share a common enemy. He's like, Batman? No, not Batman. The Court of Owls. They're the ones who messed with you that night, and they will continue to mess with you as long as you want to take over Gotham. So if you want to truly take over Gotham, they're the ones you need to fight against. And he throws them a mask of the Court of Owls. And so Bane throws that mask down in front of his gang and says, this is who we're after. And they're like, Court of Owls doesn't exist, though. And it's like, okay, but like they do, and we're going to end them. So at that point, he says, first we're going to destroy the Court of Owls, then we will destroy the Batman, then I will take over Gotham for myself, prepare my army. And he crunches the mask underneath his boot. And that leads into Talon number, I think, like 7. So yeah, it's kind of just its own independent thing where this story bridges the gap of, here's the last time we saw Bane, how did we get him to here? And I think it was well done. I think it was honestly a good little, obviously it is kind of a retcon, but at the same time, it didn't have to change anything. It's just, Bane has been on a collision course with the Court of Owls, we just haven't seen it. And he hasn't had to change anything at all in there. So I think it's well thought out. I think it's well done. Art style, Mikel Janin, fantastic. Looks great the whole way through. So I'm going to give this one, I'm going to give it a 7.5. And the only reason it's not the 8 is that it is just too brief. I can't justify giving it an 8 because there's just not enough content there, if that makes sense. This is a bridging part, and I like how they bridged it, but I can't give it an 8 because of that. So check out Talon if you haven't been. Tales of the Legion of Superheroes, Future Tense, Goodbye, and Never Ending Battle all written by Shali Fish and art by Chris Sprouse. So this is 3 completely separate stories, but they were all the backup stories to the tail end of Grant Morrison's action run, particularly issues 16, 17, and 18. So I'm going to just cover them all in one big batch here. So first off is Tales of the Legion of Superheroes, Future Tense, where we open up on a guy getting shot. We find out very soon afterwards that this is the president-elect, and the Legion of Superheroes jump in and stop him from getting shot. And you've got the whole gang here. You've got Ultra Boy, Shrinking Violet, Saturn Girl, Colossal Boy, Chameleon Boy, Brainiac 5, and Bouncing Boy. And they all use their powers in various ways to jump in and stop this assailant. And then they interrogate him, and they're like, who are you? Who are you working for? And he's like, I'm not working for anybody. I've seen the future. This guy is going to, like, ruin everything if he becomes president. And they're like, okay, and you kill him instead of just warning people? That seems stupid. And it's like, warnings never do anything. I had to do it myself. And he's like, okay, well, Saturn Girl, read his mind, see who he's actually working for. And Saturn Girl does so, and she's like, nah, he believes it. He's working alone, and he believes everything he's saying. It's just like, all right, well, he's delusional then. Send him to prison. And at that point, he manages to escape from the police that have him, and he's like, oh, well, that's why I infused my body with this rare element. And he starts charging after the president again to basically suicide bomb himself, but Brainiac 5 throws up a shield to contain the explosion. And then the president's just like, oh my god, Legion, thank you so much. You've done so much. Everything I do from this point forward is only possible because of you, the Legion of Superheroes. And they're just like, okay, thanks, I guess. So then he hops on a plane, and Saturn Girl's like, okay, here's the thing. When I scanned that crazy guy's mind, turns out he's from a planet that actually has a lot of precognition people. So he might have actually seen the future. It's like, wait, is he saying this president might actually do bad things? And he's like, no, because I scanned him too, and he's not evil. He's just a normal guy. So, like, I don't know. It's a lot going on. Maybe he was delusional. Maybe someone planted the thought in his brain. Maybe this president will end up being a bad dude. But regardless, whatever he accomplishes is on us for now. And then we see the president inside his jet or whatever, and he's like, oh yeah, no, I threw up a hypnotic disguise to throw off Saturn Girl. They have no idea that it's actually me, Universo. And then he tells his driver to kill himself because no one can know that he transformed into Universo in the meantime. So yeah, that's that. It's an okay little story. I'd give it like a 7. It's not hurting anyone. It's just like an average, like, yeah, no, it's good. Art's fine. Next story is Goodbye. And we see a sequence of Clark getting prepped for his prom night, his senior prom, along with things that are going on in Action Comics at this point, like him fighting in all the different timelines and whatnot. And he has a moment talking to Pa Kent out on the porch, and then all of a sudden, the tuxedo-wearing Clark Kent, age 17, 18, is replaced by Clark Kent, who's in the middle of that fight. And Pa Kent can see him, and he's like, Clark, what are you wearing? What is going on here? And he's like, oh my god, okay, Dad, this is kind of hard to explain. It's not a trick. Like, at some point in the future, time is going to kind of fold back on itself, and I guess that's just what's happening here. But screw all that. He goes in, he gives his dad a hug, and he's like, yeah, no, it's a long story, but like, if I don't know how long this is going to last. I just want to tell you, like, my friends, my job, I've got a regular job, I've got all this stuff. And Pa Kent just interrupts him like, look, all I want to know are 2 things. 1, are you happy? And Clark says yes. And he's like, 2, are you helping people? And Clark says, yeah, for sure. And he's like, all right, that's all I need to know. That's I'm happy for you. I'm glad that you're doing that. But based off of everything you're telling me and the way you're phrasing it, I'm guessing that me and your mom don't, like, make it very far into your life. Like, I'm guessing we're kind of marked for death here. And Clark goes quiet, and he's like, yeah, it's fine. I get it. Like, we're old. We were never going to be able to last your entire life. It was going to happen sooner or later. And he's like, all you got to do is just face it with courage, hold your head high, and then both him and Clark say, because Kents aren't quitters. And Clark says, no, Dad, thank you for everything that you and Mom have done. It's really meant the world to me. And he says he loves you. They hug, and then time snaps back, it's 17-year-old Clark, and he's like, "What's going on, Dad? Why am I here?" And he's like, "Oh, I guess I'm just getting sentimental. That's why I was hugging you." And they say the line again, like, "Yep, meet it with your head held high, because Kents aren't quitters." And then Ma comes out with the camera and says, "Oh, boys, I just want a memento, because this is going to be one night that we're going to remember for many years to come." Of course, the sad part at the end of that story being the fact that they died that night in current continuity. That's the end of them. So it's a heartfelt little thing. I'm glad. It feels like one of those things where in a time travel story they would give you that, just so it's like, no, he had that last goodbye, and they understood like what was coming, and they faced it head on. I like it. It's a nice little, just touching, emotional story. So I'm going to give this one I'll give it like a 7.5. It feels like a 7.5, honestly. So last story we get is pretty much entirely dialogue free. It is the future, and we're at the Museum of Terran Heritage, and there's a bunch of kids there on a school trip. One of the kid gets bullied, and the bully like looks around to see if anybody's going to help the kid, like get in his way, and everyone just kind of shies away. They all don't look at it. So we see one little green alien kid. He makes his way into the Hall of Superman, more or less. And by the way, the name of this is called Never-Ending Battle. And we see all the stuff, and there's just little speech bubbles saying famous quotes from different Superman lore, like, "Look up in the sky, faster than a speeding bullet. I've got you, but who's got..." Or sorry, "You've got me, but who's got you?" Like, stuff like that. And more kids come in, and they all see this Hall of Superman, and the main kid, he like sees this image of Superman saving this young kid down on the ground, and so he walks back out to where the bully is, who's still picking on the kid, and he stands in the way of the bully, and the bully's like, "Whatever, I'm gonna beat you both up." But then we see all the other kids who have made their way into the hall are also in the way, and the bully is like, "All right, well, I don't want to fight you anyway," and so he walks off. All the kids are super happy that they stood up for their friend. And then as they're told to leave by their teacher, the kid makes his way back into the hall, and we see the statue of Superman winking down at him, saying like, "Good job, kid." Again, nice little cute little story. I have nothing wrong with that. The art's great. I like the fact that they do it all pretty much dialogue free. No harm in that. So overall, I'm going to give that one another 7.5. So all the Action Comics backups up till the end of Grant Morrison's run, very good. I enjoyed them all. Yeah, no, it was just solid throughout, and I'm happy that the writer and artist managed to get so much in on such few pages. Good Boy, written by Scott Lobdell, art by Ken Lashley. This is the backup story for Superboy 18. I don't even know why this is here. I don't even need this book to tell you what happens, because it's 4 pages long, and one of those is a double wide spread. So, whatever. It picks up somewhere in the Amazon. A random alien woman has crashed, and she's like, "Please, if anyone can hear me, if my news doesn't get out, then Earth will die." And then a bunch of other more brutish-looking aliens come up, and they're like, "You idiot, you've just broadcasted on a signal that no humans can hear. You will die with your secrets." And so they go up to attack her, and then all of a sudden, there's a growling behind them, and it's Krypto the Superdog, and he goes and he attacks the brutish aliens, and the one in the ship says, "I guess someone heard me after all. Too bad for you." That's it. That's all it was. Krypto has never appeared in Superboy, and even now that I am doing this 2 issues after this backup story happened, he still hasn't shown up. He's still not around. I don't know why this is here. Is it a bad story? No, it's not a story. There's not. It's just, it's a scene. It's not even a scene, because like it doesn't. You don't even see who this person is, what happens to them afterwards. There's nothing. I can't even rate it. But if I had to rate it, I give it like a 5, straight down the middle, because I can't say it's good or bad because there's nothing here. Why is this the backup story? God, this is frustrating. Larfleeze, written by Keith Giffen, art by Scott Collins. This is the backup story to Threshold number 1 through 5. It's a long one, so buckle in. We pick up in the Vega system on Okara, which is Larfleeze's home planet, of course. And this picks up after Sade has been killed by the Third Army in the New Guardians book. And Larfleeze has picked up a new little servant of his named Stargrave, who I think might be like the same race as Brainiac. I think it might be a Coluan, so take that for what you will. But regardless, it opens up with Larfleeze saying, hey, the Guardians of the Universe have that big book for Green Lanterns. I want a big book. You're going to write me a big book. And it's like, okay, what do you, like, why would we write a book if you're not going to share it with anybody? And it's just like, oh, it's a testament to me and my amazingness. And just like, okay, sure, whatever. Like, what do you want the book to say? And it's just like, I want it to say everything about Larfleeze. And it's like, right, but like, I don't know anything about you. You just brought me on. And he's like, fine, I'll dictate it to you and you just write it down. And I just want to make it clear that throughout this entire story, Stargrave is making tons of snippy comments. Like, he's just a constant feed of like, yeah, okay, sure, whatever. So he says, in the beginning there was Larfleeze, and it's like, I'm sorry, in the beginning there was, seriously, that's how you want to open it? Maybe something a little less pretentious. And Larfleeze is like, excuse me? You write what I tell you to write. And he's like, fine, in the beginning there was Larfleeze. And Larfleeze says his origin story, which was he wanted to have everything. He was always very greedy, but he was a slave on a planet, so he couldn't own anything. And then one day he managed to escape, and he found the Orange Lantern, and since then he became the most greedy man on Earth, or in the universe, I should say. And the Guardians became jealous of him, and they told him, hey, look, we won't mess with you, you won't mess with us, but you got to stay in the Vega system. So he's like, cool, I got a whole star system to myself. And that's it. That's the story. And Stargrave is like, that's it? That's all you want in your book? And he's like, yeah, what? You think you could do better? He's like, anyone could do better. But at that point, he's like, all right, look, my ring's going off. I'm getting a news alert. I've got a little search for anytime anyone says Orange Lantern. And the little news alert comes up saying, an Orange Lantern, who looks like he is human, has shown up in this star system way across the universe, and he's causing problems and whatnot. And Larfleeze immediately freaks out because he's the only Orange Lantern. It's all his. So he just storms out and goes to take care of whoever that is. And we see that he leaves his power battery behind, and Stargrave is like, huh, that's weird, he left that behind. And another voice says, well, that's pretty much what we were hoping for. So then some time passes, Larfleeze arrives back home. He's like, yeah, I showed up and they said, oh, this star system doesn't even exist. They treated me like I'm an idiot. Who would dare tease Larfleeze like that? And when he arrives back home, all of his stuff has been taken. He's been robbed. So he's interrogating Stargrave, saying, all right, what did you see? What happened? He's just like, a bunch of people showed up. They were wearing masks, and then I was knocked out. And he's like, that's very convenient that you were knocked out. And he's like, it wasn't for me. I was knocked out. And so he says, like, all right, fine, you're good. Let Stargrave go. And Stargrave's like, you want to call the authorities? And he's like, who has more authorities than Larfleeze? And it's like, do you even know what I mean by authorities? And it's like, no. Do they catch criminals? It's like, yeah, that's pretty much all they do. It's like, all right, cool. I've got a great idea. So he picks up Stargrave in a little ball because he doesn't want his property getting damaged, and he whisks him away. And they make their way to some smugglers called the Star Rovers, and Larfleeze is like, okay, here's the deal. You find who took my stuff and kill them. And Star Rovers are like, we don't really kill. And it's like, fine, you find them and I'll kill them. And it's basically, they just keep on lowering down of like, look, if you tell us anything about like what was stolen, we could help you. And Larfleeze is just like almost purposely difficult. Like, I don't want to tell you because it's mine, and I don't want you getting any wrong ideas. And it's like, okay, well, when you pay us, we're going to have to know what's up. And he's like, pay? I'm not going to pay you anything. How dare you ask for pay? And at that point, his ring goes off, and a bunch of constructs come crashing in through the building. And everyone starts freaking out like, oh God, what are these things? And he's like, I don't know. They're my constructs, but I didn't make them. Like, they didn't come out of my ring. One of the Star Rovers named Carol hears this and is just like, well, maybe if we shoot you dead, then these things will stop. And Larfleeze freaks out on her for trying to shoot him. During all this, though, the constructs just start to disappear, and Larfleeze is like, okay, well, I'm going to kill all of you for trying to attack me. And Stargrave's like, okay, if you guys keep on asking for pay, this isn't going to work out. So just go along with what I say. And Stargrave steps up and be like, hey, Larfleeze, you win. They agreed they'd do it for free. And he's like, good, glad. So we make our way through their little base thing through space, and Stargrave points out like, hey, you lost your power battery, and it's been a couple hours, which means all things considered, you're going to run out of a charge in like just a few hours. And Larfleeze didn't consider this, so he starts freaking out like, oh God, no, I can't lose my power. So then we make our way to essentially an intergalactic diner, and they're waiting to meet up with this other guy who's going to be able to help them find the stuff even faster, because now there's like a time limit on it here. And everyone's just kind of chewing out Larfleeze for how much of a prick he's being the whole time, until we get introduced to our guy named Branks Rancor, who is this big beast-looking guy with a girl on his arm named Mainpiece. And apparently his whole thing is that he's worked with the Star Rovers before, and he's able to sniff out, like, they give it a term, but it's basically like he's just an enhanced bloodhound, where he's able to sniff something out and then follow the trail and figure out where it is. So that's the long and short of it. He, of course, brings up the subject of pay once again. Larfleeze gets pissed off about it, but Rancor doesn't back down, so they get into this huge fight in the middle of the diner. Larfleeze's ring starts to go on the fritz, so he's unable to fight back properly. And then at that point, some killer drones from Legion, not the Legion of Superheroes, but Legion, which I'm sure stands for a thing, show up and try to collect bounties on like all the people in this diner. So a big fight breaks out, and then once again, Larfleeze's orange constructs show up and start attacking everybody around, including the Legion drones. So it's like a three-way battle going on. Eventually, Larfleeze is getting so pissed off that his own constructs aren't listening to him. One of them attacks Stargrave, and he's like, no, how dare you try to take something that is mine, that he just subconsciously gets rid of all of them. They all just start to disappear. And at that point, Rancor's like, okay, I don't know what all that was about, but regardless, this guy, my price is going up if he's like this powerful, if he's able to just summon the stuff, because he is clearly not mentally okay. And at that point, Stargrave's trying to mediate, and he just goes over to Rancor like, look, just pretend like it's for free, and I'll just bill me for whatever. I'll get you your money. Just go with it. And Rancor's like, fine, whatever. I'll do it for free, quote unquote. So at that point, Rancor's like, all right, look, Larfleeze, if you have always been handling your stuff, if you've always been up on your treasure, just let me sniff you, because I'm sure your treasure smells exactly like it. So he sniffs out Larfleeze, and he's like, huh, okay, is this like some kind of joke? This guy reeks of his treasure. And they're like, yeah, he rubs up on it all the time. It's like, no, you don't understand. The treasure is like inside him. Like, his treasure's with him. The treasure's nowhere else. He's got it. And at that point, Larfleeze is trying to reason out like, wait a minute, hold on, what? I have the treasure inside me? And then all of a sudden, an evil orange construct of Sade comes out saying, you stupid idiot, I'm not going to have you, like, ignore my perfect revenge. This is all my plan. And Sade, the only way that a construct can be made is if Larfleeze is the one who kills them. But Larfleeze points out, like, I didn't kill you. The Third Army is the one that kills you. I would never damage my own property. That's not what I do. And so she's like, wait, what? And then Larfleeze uses the confusion to suck her back into the ring. And at this point, Stargrave's like, okay, hold on. I think I got it figured out now. You didn't kill Sade, yet somehow she's living inside your ring. How is that possible? And he's just like, all right, well, maybe, just maybe, she tampered with your ring when she was alive, and that caused this sort of like thing where she's coming up now later. And maybe she made you steal your own treasure as some sort of revenge. And he's like, I don't remember any of this. And it's like, no, you wouldn't. She did it when you were asleep, I'm sure. And so then Sade pops back out of the ring again and says, like, stop telling him my evil plan. I want him to suffer. And so at that point, the Rovers and Rancor are like, this seems like it doesn't concern us anymore. We're going to bounce. And they just leave. And we are left with Larfleeze getting sucked into his own mind along with Sade. And inside, Sade explains everything. How she hated working under Larfleeze, obviously. So she assumed that eventually Larfleeze would be the death of her for whatever reason. So she laid down some post-hypnotic suggestions in Larfleeze's mind when he was asleep, hid it inside the part of his brain that controlled generosity, so that way he'd never ever find it. And after her death, it would trigger, where it would A, make this construct, despite the fact that he didn't kill her, and B, have it so that one night Larfleeze would see this news thing, fly off, lose his memory, come back, steal his own treasure, and then make him forget that he did any of that. And Larfleeze is like, okay, so then where's my treasure? And Sade says, oh, it's gone forever. I had you destroy it, along with your power battery. You are now completely powerless. How do you like me now? And then Larfleeze snaps back into reality. Stargrave is there like, oh, hey, I was wondering if you were going to come back. Everyone left except for me. Maybe you're wondering why I didn't leave. And then Larfleeze just starts sobbing that his treasure is all gone. And Stargrave is like, all right, yeah, I guess I'm chopped liver here. And that's the book. So Larfleeze itself, I think in the 5th or 6th wave, becomes a book in its own right. This is just the lead into it, the sort of prologue. It's good. It's a fine little... like it's well contained. It tells its own story. It gets a little bit convoluted towards the end there, I think, probably because they realized like, oh, we're going to, instead of it being its own self-contained thing, we're going to turn into a larger series. So they had to probably adjust midway, but it wasn't bad. It was never a bad time. The art's the only thing that's a little bit iffy for me, but that's just, I'm not a huge fan of some of the way that Scott Collins does things, mainly how heavy it goes on the inks. So that's just me. Overall, I'm going to give the entirety of the story like a... I want to give it a 6.5 just on merit, but I think there are enough funny one-liners in this and actually clever moments that I'm going to bump it up to the 7. So it is a 7 overall, but only because I enjoy the humor of it, which may not be for everybody. But yeah, that's Larfleeze. Shazam chapters 9 through 12, written by Jeff Johns, art by Gary Frank. This is the backup story to Justice League, specifically 16 and then 18 through 20. Last time we left off, Billy basically told Freddy, hey, I'm going to stay Shazam full time. I'm never going to be a kid again. Go home. And then Black Adam showed up. So this issue picks up with Sloth, one of the Sins, and Dr. Sivana making their way to a recycling center in order to get one of the brother-sister Sins as well. And we see every time that Sivana uses his magic eye, he like keels over a little bit. It causes him immense pain. So one of the foremen steps up and says like, you guys can't be in here. And Sloth just puts him to sleep because that's kind of his thing. And then Sloth goes over and reaches towards one of the women, and turns out that it's actually Pride in disguise. And Sloth is like, hey, yeah, Black Adam's got a whole thing. We got to go. And it's just like, okay, sweet. So then we see Billy versus Black Adam, and Billy's like, oh my God, you've got a much cooler costume. That it's black. That's freaking awesome. Like, did the wizard give you powers too? By the way, how old are you? And at that point, Black Adam just punches him through a mall, more or less. And when he gets up, he realizes that he's bleeding, and he's like, oh, okay, this guy can, like, really do damage. That's an issue. So his electricity powers cause all the lights in the mall to go out. And Black Adam just bursts in and keeps on laying the hurt on him. And Billy tells him, like, you're going to hurt someone. You got to stop. He's like, yeah, I'm going to hurt you. And he's like, okay, fine, let's bring it. So he throws a punch at Black Adam, who immediately catches it. And he's like, okay, fine, what do you want? And Black Adam tells him, I want your power. I want it all now. And he throws Billy. And Billy, just out of fear, says Shazam, turns back into a kid, and Black Adam is unable to track him down. He's like, no matter what, I will find you. You cannot hide from me. So then we cut back to the Vasquez's home, and that one dude, whatever his name is, the real dickhead, he's there just basically saying, I know that Billy's the one who trashed my car. I don't know how he did it, but get him out here. Get him now. And he's brought the cops along with him, and they're just like, he hasn't been home, but there's no way that Billy is the one who did this. And all the kids are listening in, just like, oh God, like, what happened to Billy? What's going on? Did he actually do this? And they all look over to Freddy, who's just morosely watching TV. And they're like, Freddy, where is Billy? And he's like, don't know, don't care, not my problem. So the one dickhead guy, like, is threatening Billy, and the dad is just not standing for it. They get into a little bit of a tussle. But before it can escalate too far, a bus comes flying from the city and lands, like, right in front of their house. And everyone kind of freaks out, like, what is going on? We see Black Adam is just walking down the street, tossing cars and trucks willy-nilly. It comes onto the news, and we see Freddy watching it saying, Black Adam saying, like, hey, I'm going to track you down, champion, and I am going to kill you. And at that point, the power goes out. And Freddy turns to all of his brothers and sisters and is like, guys, I know where Billy is. Billy is a superhero. His name is Shazam. And everyone's like, who the hell's Shazam? So they go into town. They don't tell their mom or dad. And Freddy's just kind of trying to explain what all happened. And they all think that he's joking up until they see all the lightning going off. And they're like, okay, I think we know where we can find him. And Billy is back at the zoo talking to Tawny. And he's like, do you think I should go back? Do you think I should fight? Like, I'm just a kid. This is all some big mistake. And all the kids show up and they're just like, hey, yeah, Freddy told us the truth. And Billy kind of freaks out for a second, but it's like, no, the dude on TV is trying to kill you. This is extenuating circumstances. Like, we got to figure out what to do here. And he's like, I'm not going to turn back into Shazam because then he's going to be able to find me. And Mary points out, like, well, he's tearing apart the city and people are getting hurt. Like, we need a hero. So Billy at that point takes all the kids and they go back to the same subway station. And he's like, the wizard told me I'm not supposed to be Shazam. It was never supposed to be me. We're just going to go back to the Rock of Eternity the same way we got there before. And he's going to pick a different person who can take on Black Adam. So at that point, Black Adam is greeted by Sivana, who has gotten together all 7 of the sins, and he's like, perfect, well, time to end the world, and also the new champion along with it. So the kids have made their way into the subway, the power's gone out again, and Billy's just trying to will the Rock of Eternity into happening, but nothing's going on. But then he hears the voice of Francesca, the woman in the mirror that he heard before, coming out of, I'm blanking on his name, but the iPad that the one kid brought along with. And they're all just like, okay, so Billy's going crazy. But Francesca says, okay, here's the deal. You can go back to the Rock of Eternity under 2 circumstances. 1, you got to be underground, which you are. And 2, you got to be Shazam. And he's like, well, if I turn into Shazam, Black Adam's going to kill me. He's like, right, so that's the problem. And she specifically says, like, look, you are connected to Black Adam. Because you're both champions, you're connected as family now. And Mary kind of hears the word family, and Billy's like, I'm sorry, did she just, like, is that something that's happening? But at that point, the subway starts collapsing down on itself, and Billy asks Francesca, like, who is this guy? Like, what's going on here? Can you tell me anything about him? And he's like, yeah, like, kinda. Here's the history of Black Adam. And we see in ancient Kahndaq, a bunch of evil, like, barbarians came in, and they were just terrorizing all the people there. There was this young kid named Iban who was forced into, sorry, Amon, my bad. Ibak is the name of the evil guy. Amon, he was forced into slavery down in the mines, and he was praying for a miracle. And then one day his uncle showed up and said, like, I'm here to save you. Your mother and father, they're dead. So it's just us now. And one of the guards attacks the uncle, wounds him, but Amon doesn't abandon him. And they make their way deeper into the cave. Eventually they are trapped, and they are summoned into the court of the wizard and a bunch of other gods. And Billy's like, oh my god, he's a kid. That explains everything. That explains why the wizard didn't want another kid. I can go talk to him. I can reason with him as Billy. And Francesca's like, that's not, I'm still telling the story. And he's like, no, don't worry, I got it. So he runs up the subway, just goes straight up to Black Adam, and he's like, hey, I'm Billy Batson. I'm the new champion. Like, look, I get it. You're scared. You want people to hurt because they hurt you as a kid. But, like, that's not the way to do things. I get it. You're terrified. And Black Adam just picks him up by the head and says, you think I'm scared? You're a child. How dare you think you can compare yourself to me? Why would the wizard ever choose such a small, pathetic thing as you? You want to know my story? Here's what actually happened. And we continue on where we picked up, where the Rock of Eternity was actually like a public thing. Like, it was a place in the real world you could get to, and a bunch of sorcerers trained there. And Amon's like, oh, hey, what's going on? Why am I here? And the wizard says, I need a champion. All the people on this little court have their own champions. I want you to be mine. Do you accept? And he's like, I will, under the condition of you help my uncle who's bleeding out. And he's like, yeah, you can share the power with your family. It like goes through blood. Just go ahead, take the power, and you'll both be saved. And so they both take the power. They become champions of Shazam. And the uncle immediately comes back and be like, let's kill all the bad people. And Amon says, no, like, we have to show mercy. We have to be better than them. That's the whole point. We got to get justice, not revenge. And the uncle's just like, but like, please? And he's like, no, well, this is the way we got to do things. We have to share hope, not pain. And the uncle starts crying. And in the end, he ends up hugging his nephew. And the nephew says, I love you, Uncle Adam. And at that point, he's like, all right, let's go do it. Let's activate our powers and go save everybody. And so they step up and they say Shazam. But as he's doing so, Uncle Adam snaps Amon's neck and kills him. And he's like, that was the only way I was going to get enough power to free the world from those who enslave it. And that's what I'm going to do again. I'm going to take you out so I have all the power I need. At this point, the kids are looking on, seeing that he is not in a good spot. Apparently, Pedro knows how to drive a garbage truck. So they hop in the garbage truck and go to crash it into Black Adam, which frees Billy up enough that he's able to say Shazam again. And he's like, oh, I'm not going to run from you anymore, Black Adam. And he's like, yeah, I bet you're not. And we see that he has his hands on all the kids, his one in each arm and then all the rest under his feet. And he's like, if you don't give me everything I want, I'm killing all of them. And that's where we leave off. So the finale of this is going to take place in Justice League 21. That's just entirely Shazam wrapping up the story. So look forward to that. But this, I mean, it's solid. It's always been solid. The art's fantastic. The writing's great. The pacing to it, you just got this sort of like, as much as I hate to say it because it is just the movie, it's got this cinematic feel to it. I love it all. It's a great told story. So I'm going to give this section of them, 9 through 12, like, I got to give it like a 9 out of 10. It's great. It's a fantastic way to tell the new origin of Shazam. Just broken up in these smaller chunks, but still great all throughout. So I'm enjoying it, and I look forward to the finale some point next month. Security Detail, Missing Pieces, and Trial by Fire, all written by Matt Kindt. These are the backup stories to JLA numbers 2 through 4, and there are various artists on it, but mainly all of these are following Martian Manhunter as he does general things. So first one, Security Detail with Scott Clark as the artist, is basically saying, hey, once superhero showed up, once Superman showed up on the scene, the security needed for places like the White House got crazy complicated. And he just basically walks through of like, what happens when someone tries to get into the White House nowadays with superheroes. And apparently outside on the perimeter is phase-proof technology, which costs as much as like a small nation. There is a metal detector at the entrance that also detects super free radicals, which will get most superpowers just weeded out that way. The floors have a bunch of pressure sensors that not only sense like the pressure but also the weight, and using computers the gait and the like walking of anybody else who walks on them, that weeds out most shapeshifters and things like that. All of the agents are constantly live streaming like all the faces of everyone, and they get perfect information from all the servers and whatnot. And whoever is sharing this information seems to be this random guy, this random agent who's standing there, and he's like, my target? Well, my target is the president, of course. That's why I'm doing all this. And why I'm like, what am I doing? Well, that's a little bit more complicated, but he's going to basically use basic telepathy. That's it. And we see one of the agents is standing outside of Amanda Waller's office as she's trying to pitch the idea of the JLA to the president, not directly to him, but like to some staffers. And they're basically like, no, the idea of a superhero, basically police force, is borderline fascist, and the president is never going to go for that. And Waller gives the whole thing of like, you guys just, if Superman wanted to destroy the world tomorrow, what would America's response be? Like, we don't have one right now, and we need to get one. That's the whole point of having the JLA. And the narrator's just saying, like, it's never done. The real influencing of policy is never done with fists or battles or fighting. It's done with the ever so subtle nudges, the suggestions that get the person where they need to be. And we see this guy who we've been following from the beginning. He finally makes his way into the Oval Office. And he's like, well, sometimes, though, you do need to be a little bit more direct. But regardless, that's how this guy got on here. And he pulls out a gun and aims it at the back of the president's head and says, die for the society. And the narration switches from a yellow box into a green one saying, oh, the security caught this guy. Like, all those crazy things they had outside that were meant to weed this guy out, it caught him. But I forced the guards to see something else just so this guy could get in here so that I could make my point. And we see a hand phase through this guy's head as he then collapses down to the ground dead. And the agent, which turns out to be Martian Manhunter, says, Mr. President, your security measures are not enough. You need us. So he purposely faked this guy being able to get through to sell the point of the JLA being a necessary force that America needed. And the president, which is very clearly just Obama, is like, yeah, all right, I got nothing to say about that. Introducing the JLA, and that leads into their big reveal that they had at the end of issue 2. So next, oh, and for that one, it was good. I enjoyed it. I think it did a good job of selling a point of it being a, like, here's all these crazy things. Like, if you think it through, if superhumans did exist, what things would you want to set up to protect the VIPs? And this sounds like, yeah, he thought it through. So I'm going to give it I'll give it a 7.5 on that one. Art's also just great. Next up is Missing Pieces, art by Manuel Garcia. And we see that this is basically just Martian Manhunter probing into Catwoman's mind, making sure she's on the up and up. And as he goes in, he's like, yeah, she's just got a lot of cats and like things and stuff like that, but I am managing to sift through it. We see that her apartment explodes and she lost everything. And then we see through her past how she was trying to run away from the orphanage, but she never did. She lost her hope. She lost her identity. That's where she started like stealing wallets and stuff like that, until eventually she became Catwoman. And he makes the point that, like, you know, she put on a mask, but masks can just as easily be blindfolds, keeping you blind to what reasons you're really doing this for. And we see during this process, Catwoman is also seeing into Martian Manhunter's mind. And she sees him seemingly going through this alien-looking jungle. He looks different. He's not quite in the same form he has now. And he leaps off this cliff onto this horrific-looking beast. And he uses his phasing abilities, his transformation abilities, all of his powers to land on this beast and basically kill it, even though it is, as she's able to understand without knowing how she understands it, is this terrifying beast that like nobody has ever killed before. But he douses himself in all of its blood, absorbs its memories into himself, and then proceeds to fly out of the atmosphere. And at that point, the connection is broken, and Martian Manhunter talks to her and just like, I'm sorry I had to do that, Selina. And she's like, hey, no problem, but like, don't ever do that again, because I know I'm messed up, but you need some therapy, man. So that's that one. It's good. I think I would prefer it more if it were just the second half, like if we focus solely on the Martian Manhunter stuff, because the Selina stuff just isn't as interesting. Like, don't get me wrong, it's probably necessary, but I'm more interested in Martian Manhunter stuff. So overall, I'm going to give that one I'll give it just a flat 7. 6.5. 7 sounds high, so I'm giving it a 6.5. And then lastly, we have Trial by Fire, art by Andre Guinaldo. In Justice League of America number 4, they were fighting against the Shaggy Man, who then spit fire at Martian Manhunter, and he's like, I can phase through stuff, and like fire shouldn't affect me, but it does. And the whole reason it does is because from that last issue, when I went to go kill that beast, it was a trial. It was a trial off on another planet where I had to separate from my home and go kill this beast to prove myself as being able to become a leader, because the leader on my planet is dying. And he goes through all the logistics of living on Mars, of how it is an uninhabitable planet, but because of his people, they were able to set up like psychic shields and people whose sole purpose was to ingrain themselves with the planet and make it so that things like agriculture and life could be sustained on this planet. And they said how everyone was just part of a hive mind. There was no such thing as the concept of being alone, because everyone shared all of their thoughts all the time. And everyone was happy with that. Everyone was cool. However, we see that during this time where Martian Manhunter went off planet, he was far enough away that he did have to sever himself and his connection with his home. So this is the first time that he's ever felt actual loneliness in his life. And when he was coming back, he was like, yes, I would be brought in as the new leader and I would lead my people into a new age. He comes back and everyone's dead and everything's on fire. And he has no idea what happened, but he can hear through their psychic screams or whatnot. The only memory that remains is the word that no one, like the concept of man did not have a word, but it was the only thing that was in their mind, along with the word hunter. And at that point, Martian Manhunter had survivor's guilt as well. He was like, why am I the only one who survived? And that's why his unconscious is now afraid of that fire, the fire that was left when his people died, because it's kind of like the only thing that he thinks he deserves is to die in the same fire that they did. So, yeah, it's messed up, but that's where it ends. I like that last one. It's solid. It's really good. I am curious to see if they give the explanation as to what actually killed his people, because saying they just all caught on fire seems a little bit weird, especially in that he's saying specifically they suddenly got the concept of what man was. So, and there's a hunter as well. So I'm hoping to get more explanation on that in future backups. But yeah, I'm liking this backstory of Martian Manhunter being here, because he's been around since the beginning of the New 52 with Stormwatch, but he's always been left in this sort of unexplored territory. And these comics, I feel like, are the first ones that are going through and giving us that extra little bit of information of like, here's how he came to be. Here is his backstory. And I'm interested. I think he's an interesting character. So that one I'm going to give I'll give a flat 7 on that one. It's good, not great, but mainly just because it leaves me wanting more. It doesn't quite give the answers that I'm looking for yet. So, yeah, these backups are solid, and I'm looking forward to seeing what Mattkin can pull out in the future. Tomahawk Part 4, written by Justin Gray and Jimmy Palmiotti, art by Phil Winslade. So this is the final part of the Tomahawk story. Last time, Tomahawk was betrayed by a British general that he thought was his ally against the Americans. Turns out he wasn't, so they swore that they would burn down the British fort. And this part begins with them burning down the British fort. And as they're firing off all their fire arrows and whatnot, they say, yep, they're going to have to come out through the main gate, and when they do, we're going to greet them with bullets. But Tomahawk's like, screw that, I'm going in there and killing them now. So he just busts through this flaming fort and immediately starts unloading on all of the British soldiers inside. And we see inside is Colonel Lancaster, the man who directly betrayed him. He gets shot by Tomahawk. He takes a shot to the chest. And then Tomahawk gets up on top of him and has his tomahawks to his throat. And it's just like, you have killed everyone I care about. You're the one to blame. And he's like, the only good Indian is a dead Indian. He's like, yeah, maybe, but it won't be at your hands. And so he cuts off Lancaster's head. And as he's doing so, he looks in the back and sees the British one who sold him out, and hears him saying, like, anyone who's able to save me is able to get reward from General Washington himself. And Tomahawk's like, screw, I'm so done with this General Washington crap. All he talks about is freedom, and yet my people are equally as worse off as they were before. And so he throws one of his tomahawks into this guy's spine, and he collapses down on a cart. We see all the other British are running and escaping away. And so he taunts him. He's just like, see how your troops run away. No one's here to save you. This would be your final moment. And the guy's like, I didn't want you for an enemy. He's like, yeah, well, you sure got me. And Tomahawk tells him, I'm not going to kill you. I'm going to leave you here, and you're never going to walk again. That's the price for forsaking me. And the general tells him, look, the Americans are never going to stop. They're going to keep on expanding out westwards. They're going to push you off the West Coast and drown you. And Tomahawk and all of his Native American buddies are like, yeah, maybe they will. But the difference is we're never going to stop fighting. We may not win, but we are going to die trying. So they all leave. The fort is left burning, and it is a small Pyrrhic victory for Tomahawk. Honestly, I enjoyed it. I think that it was a fine little tale. I do question, obviously they used some real characters in this, such as Tecumseh and the Prophet. Like, these are real people who existed. I question how much of this actually did kind of happen. Obviously, there was never a guy named Tomahawk who had these like big heroic moments, but I think there might have been a little bit of historical accuracy in just a couple things here. I'm curious as to where. That being said, it did feel fantastical. It, of course, is very moralizing of a after the fact of, we know that the Americans aren't going to stop. Like, it's very much just a cautionary tale, I guess, but it's good. It's a solid little read. It's not anything that I think was ever going to deserve its own book, but as a backup, it suits it perfectly well. So I'm going to give this particular part a 6.5. It as much as I say it is good, it is very much just a single part, which kind of just wraps it all up in one big action scene. It's not anything that's amazing in its own right. So 6.5 feels about right. 19th Century Stormwatch, written by Jimmy Palmiotti and Justin Gray, art by Staz Johnson. So this is the backup story to All-Star Western 17, 18, and 19, and it's showing the formation of the 19th century iteration of Stormwatch. So first story we have is about Jenny Freedom. and she is currently in a hot air balloon powered by steam, and it's storming, it's raining, she's in the skies above Maryland, and she's like, yep, I'm a century child. I was born at midnight in 1800. I'll die at midnight in 1899. And my abilities are to control steam for the most part. Also a small amount of light, but mostly steam. That's my thing because of the steam engine. So we see that there is this plan. A guy named Jack is going to attack President Arthur. And he has a whole bunch of steampunk stuff. But more importantly, he has summoned a bunch of ancient Incan mummies to do his bidding. So we're hopping from hot air balloon to hot air balloon. She has a helper that I honestly don't know the name of, and I don't think we ever see it. But the helper dies anyway, so no big deal. So anyway, hops onto the hot air balloon, and we see Jack here has all this steampunk stuff all in his arms, and he's like, oh, yes, well, I wish there was a spell to get rid of you, much like the spell I used to summon up these mummies, and just like, okay, well, if you promise to go to prison, I promise that I'll visit you on your days off. And he's like, psh, whatever. So he shoots at her, and he tells the little helper guy, you take care of the mummies, I'll go take care of him. So they get into a sword fight, and he's like, oh, I ought to warn you, I'm a fencing master. And she's like, oh, that's funny, I trained your fencing master. And so they keep on fighting each other until eventually the helper is killed, and she's questioning him like, what's your interest in killing President Arthur so recently after the assassinated President Garfield? And he's just like, psh, I'm just an anarchist, screw this place. So they approach the White House. He summons more monkeys to deal with, or mummies to deal with Jenny. And then he fires off a lightning gun to fire electricity into the White House and cut it in half. And so she gets the upper hand long enough to redirect the gun upwards. It shoots his own balloon, and he's like, that was years of planning to make that happen, and you've ruined it all. This is the last time you'll get my way. And he goes to kill her. She throws a solid uppercut, and then jumps off of the ship herself just before it explodes, seemingly taking Jack with him. And as she lands down at a bar, she gets herself a whiskey and pulls out a pipe. Can't find her matches, and then all of a sudden a hand outstretches a match, and it is Adam One, the guy who is immortal and was like born at the beginning of the universe, and it's also probably Merlin. All that combined, Jenny seems to recognize him and says like, all right, whatever you want, Adam, go away. And it's just like, well, I'd like you to come back to Stormwatch. So that's number one. Number two, we see a man being hunted by a giant pig and then is strung up from a tree by a chain that the pig was doing. And this is the story of Dr. Terrence 13. So his thing, of course, is he is a debunker of paranormal claims. He rode into this small town, which is basically made up of a bunch of spiritualists, a bunch of people who think they can commune with the dead and are like mediums. And he's like, that's a whole lot of hogwash, but I'm here to solve a murder, and I'm just hoping that they don't get in my way with their crazy ass notions. And so he rides into town, and it turns out that there's been another murder by this pig thing in the interim as he was riding in just this morning. So it's like, well, all right, just send me on my way. Show me where this body is. So he does some investigations there. The woman who is accompanying him is just like, look, I know you. I've heard your story. You clearly don't believe in the things we believe in, but like, can we just kind of try to keep this focused on just the murder part? And he's like, yeah, no, whatever. But like, you're right. I don't believe in the stuff you believe in. And she offers up a 100% like honest to God seance to try to convince him otherwise. And he's like, I'd like that, but yeah, let's wait until all this is over. So he notices that the grass has been burned to form a Christian symbol, probably the crucifix. And he follows, because of the tracks that were made, that it was a farmer because of the boots, and also some droppings left behind says pig farmer. So he asks around town, finds out there's a pig farmer who is originally in town before all these spiritualists show up, and he's like, hey, you want to turn yourself into the authorities? And he's like, why would I, like, why, what are you even accusing me of? And he's like, well, all these mediums and spiritualists show up. They say they can commune with the dead. You, being a God-fearing Christian man, must think that that's just totally wrong. So you went about trying to kill them. Am I right or am I right? And so he gets swung at by the farmer, who then Terrence just lays down some judo, because apparently he was raised in rural China. So he throws a few punches, takes the guy out, finds his costume, and just reveals him to the whole town. Just be like, yep, I did it. I solved the case. And we see all of this is actually being told to Dr. Amadeus Arkham back in Gotham. And he's like, yeah, that's just one of my many stories. But hey, I'd really like to hear about this Jonah Hex guy you're hanging out with. And Arkham's like, yeah, like, no, you don't. Trust me. He's not the type of guy you want to get to know. And as soon as Arkham leaves, Terrence just slams the door shut and like, all right, back to work. And we see down in his lab, he's actually discovering the art of fingerprint, like, searching. He's dusting for them. And he's like, oh yes, everyone has their own unique fingerprint. And then a voice from behind him says, but how could you possibly make a fingerprint registry? I suggest that we get fingerprints of all the newborns at birth. That would do it. And Terrence 13 is like, who the hell are you and why are you in my house? What is this poppycock? And he's like, Doctor, I recognize that you don't believe in the supernatural, but I'm about to show you something that's going to totally flip your world around. So that's that story. And then lastly, we get the territory of Texas back in the day. Apparently, because of the gold rush, there were a lot of men out here in the Western territories, but not a lot of women. So a bunch of wagon trains made almost exclusively up of women started making their way out there. But they were constantly being stopped by people who would like take over the wagon trains and sell these people into slavery or prostitution. And so this dude named the Master Gunfighter, aka Cody Barrow, who used to be part of a whole like circus act of trick shots and stuff like that, he's decided to stop these bandits from selling these women into slavery. Turns out that he discovered there was a whole bunch of supernatural stuff after the Civil War. His whole family was killed by vampires. He too was bitten by his sister, who was a vampire, but he didn't turn, and he had to kill them all. So now he's just a Lone Ranger going around. So he's taking care of all these bandits. One of them takes a woman hostage, and he's about to shoot the guy, but then all of a sudden they hear a wolf howling, and they're like, all right, crap, this is just going back into supernatural stuff. Buddy, I don't care if you stay or if you go, but you are no longer my concern. And he tells all the women to get the wagons into a circle, get inside the circle, and set them all on fire, because that's the only way they're going to live through it. And the guy, he takes the hint, he hops on a horse, and he gets out of there safely until he is approached by a herd of werewolves. And Master Gunsman starts shooting out the werewolves as best he can. Some of them get through and attack the women, thus causing them to turn into werewolves themselves. He shoots the rest of them dead. And as he looks around, he's like, is anybody bit or scratched? And they're like, no, we're all good. You saved us. Thank you. And he's like, yeah, don't worry about it. Look, there's a town about 2 miles north. Go there once the sun rises. You'll be safe. And a voice from behind him says, and where will you be heading? And we see that the Master Gunfighter has already recognized who it is. It's Adam again. He's once again here. And he's like, hi, I need myself a Master Gunfighter. And that's where that leaves off. So the next 2 issues are a 2-parter of them and their adventure that they were all brought together to do. But I will deal with that in a future episode. For these 3, I think they were all very well done. I think that the art style being consistent over all of them, fantastic. I think probably the weakest one is the Jenny Freedom one, just because it doesn't really show her powers doing anything. It's more so, and she's the only one really with powers, so I kind of wanted to see that. I love Dr. 13. He's just funny in his own right and how he handles things. He's like a full-on Teddy Roosevelt caricature. He's great. And I enjoy the character of Master, whatever it's called. But, I mean, to be able to do trick shots, yeah, it's great and all. But it strikes me more that he's interesting because he may be, like, part supernatural himself. Like, he might have a little bit of werewolf or vampire or something in him. That's interesting. And I'm down to see how all these people interact in the next 2-parter. But as it stands here, I'm just going to give each of these a blanket 7.5. That being said, I might lower down the Jenny Freedom one to a 7.0, but in general, they're good. They are worth checking out if you can find them. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to more 19th Century Stormwatch. And that is all of the backup stories that I am going to cover today, and I hope that I never hear the word backup ever again. So, I'm kind of done just mentally here today, so I'm just gonna say what's coming out next week. Next week we have 11 comics, and those are Batwing, Detective Comics, Action Comics, Green Lantern, Earth 2, Green Arrow, The Movement, Stormwatch, Dial H, Swamp Thing, and The Phantom Stranger. There's like 7 different numbers there. Some of them are 21, some of them are 12s and 13s. Like, I'm almost done giving those numbers. I'll give them if they're important. But for now, that's all the comics I got coming out next week. Be sure to tune in. If you have any comments on any of the comics I covered or any of those backup stories, feel free to hit me up. I am on Discord and Twitter and Reddit and Patreon, and all those links are in the description and or on screen. I look forward to hearing you make more sense out of it than I did when I was trying to recap it. But that's been me. Thank you very much for watching, listening, however it is you consume this podcast. Be sure to like it, thumbs up, share it with whoever. Just put it on a billboard. Give me a QR code. That's what I want. I want a QR code on a billboard, so that way when people are driving by and trying to scan it, we can up the friggin' accident rate by a whole 200% for something that, frankly, isn't really worth it. But I'm getting off track. Thank you very much once again. And always try to remember that if it ain't broke, don't fix it.